Chapter 356. The base where Mo Heng was located. As the general manager of the base, Unbeishin had been supervising the progress of the base. His project was favored by the higher-ups of Miracle, and they had invested a lot of manpower, material, and financial resources into it. Unbeishin had also put a lot of effort into it, but the progress so far had not been satisfactory. Compared to the research progress of the other bases on the planet, Unbeishin's base had not produced much results. 2 days ago, the higher-ups of Miracle had urged him to hurry up, so Unbeishin had once again put pressure on the staff of the base. While supervising the work of the base, Unbeishin also paid attention to news from all sides. As one of Mo Heng's former students, Unbeishin knew all too well what Mo Heng was capable of, so when he received the lightning-like image, Unbeishin had been hoping to get his hands on the technology. If the higher-ups had not ordered for Mo Heng to be more lenient, Unbeishin would have interrogated Mo Heng by force long ago. Unbeishin had people keep an eye on the movements of the 11th team's captain, Silin, but the news he received was that all the members of the 11th team were in the middle of their mission, and no one was missing. This made Unbeishin very curious. Could it be that he had guessed wrong, and the news Mo Heng sent out was not for Silin? The pressure from the higher-ups, the failure of the research, and the lack of confirmation of his guesses all made the usually calm Unbeishin restless. He had a feeling that something was about to happen. It did not take long for Unbeishin's uneasy premonition to be confirmed. An unknown virus had appeared in other bases. So far, out of the 9 large experimental bases around the world, 5 had been infected, and 3 of them were now heavily infected areas that were on the verge of collapse. As soon as he received the news, Unbeishin ordered the base to be locked down. People outside the base were not allowed to enter, and those inside the base could go out, but they were not allowed to come back, at least not before the unknown virus was developed. Unbeishin even had people set up a quarantine line far away from the base. Anyone who crossed the line, unless they were a special personnel, would be killed. Unbeishin did not want his base to be infected by the virus. As long as one person was infected, the base would not be far from collapsing. Although he was an engineering researcher, he had some understanding of viruses, especially the base on the same planet. Some of the high-risk viruses involved in their research projects had always made Unbeishin uneasy, so this mechanical engineering base had always been unwelcoming to people from the virus side. Even if they were not the first to be infected, Unbeishin did not like them. When Unbeishin found out about the outbreak of the unknown virus, he had already cursed the people at the virus and biochemical base 1,000 times. He felt that it was their negligence that caused all the bases to fall into panic and unrest. It was not that Unbeishin did not suspect that someone was deliberately spreading the virus. He even instinctively suspected that it was Mo Heng's students or someone related to Mo Heng. However, the first case of infection occurred at a biochemical research base. That was one of Miracle's main genetic research projects. The security facilities there were more advanced than the mechanical engineering base, and the outbreak was a viral infection. Mo Heng, who was famous for his mechanical engineering skills, was completely unrelated to that field. In the end, Unbeishin could only direct all his dissatisfaction to the person in charge of the biochemical and virus research base. As usual, Mo Heng quietly stayed in his room. When he was bored, he would play with parts and assemble a machine. When he was tired, he would sleep and listen to some tunes. At this moment, Mo Heng was resting on a chair. He had just assembled a machine and was a little tired, so he was about to take a nap. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to fall asleep, Old Man said, who was also an academician of the League of Stars Academy of Engineering, came over to chat. "Hey, Old Man Mo, how can you still sit still?" said seemed a little uneasy and panicked. "Why can't I sit still?" Mo Heng raised his eyelids lazily. "You don't know." "Know what?" "You didn't pay attention to the public platform of the base," said looked at Mo Heng in disbelief. This was such a big thing. Forget about the public platform, all he had to do was walk out of the room and chat with the research staff outside. How could Mo not know? What the hell was this old man thinking all day? I'm not in the mood to pay attention to it. I'd rather listen to some tunes. Fortunately, he could not sleep anymore. Mo picked up a part and played with it. Said's face was twisted as he told Mo about the virus. Right now, everyone in the base is panicking. They're afraid that a case will appear in this base. If that happens, I'm afraid that all of us will die. Mo was silent for a moment. Is it that serious? I heard that no one has died yet. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's true that this virus is very powerful. Otherwise, the newly formed Special Task Force would not have been able to do anything about it. Instead, they would have died. Said had always been sensitive to viruses. He had experienced something similar before, but the disaster area was not wide. Back then, the League of Stars Academy had quickly developed a special drug to stop the spread of the disaster. However, as an academician of the League of Stars Academy who had a good influence in the academic world, Said knew the hidden story behind that incident. The virus was spread from the laboratory. Therefore, since then, Said had stayed away from the virus laboratory. He did not even want to go to some biochemical laboratories. He just focused on his mechanical engineering project. Hearing Said's words, Mo stopped playing with the parts and asked again, "What are the researchers going to do outside?" Said sighed. At first, unveil allowed someone else to go out because some researchers felt that it was not safe to stay in the base. If anyone was infected, everyone would be in trouble. After all, this virus was too fierce. It spread so fast that it caught everyone off guard. But later, more and more people wanted to go out. Unveil stopped letting them go. Who would continue working on the project if they were all released? Bullsh *T. Who would be able to calm down and work at a time like this? Mo snorted. However, it's not necessarily a good idea to go out of the base. If the virus really spreads as fast as you said, there must be a lot of pathogens in the air. Isn't it suicide to go out? There are some advanced protective and disinfection facilities in the base, but they won't be available if they go out. That's true, but many people want to leave here directly. If they leave, they won't have to face the virus. Unfortunately, Miracle won't agree. The satellite array outside is already on standby. Anyone who tries to go out will be killed by Wuxia, including the people in charge of each base. Mo curled his lips. The people of Miracle were indeed ruthless. Then what do you want to do? Mo looked at Said. Said paused. I'm going to close off the outside as well. Food is ready. I want to modify my house. At least if there's a virus outbreak in this base, I can be isolated from the patients. So, I want to ask you, do you want to do the same? If you're going to do that, stock up on food now. Said seemed overly nervous. Mo did not give him an answer. Said did not wait any longer. He said a few words and left in a hurry. Mo lay on the chair and did not move for a long time. He naturally understood what Said was thinking. Many people in the base were probably doing the same. But Mo had his own ideas. As the father of a general, he understood how the higher-ups thought. If this place really fell, and the virus was too powerful, and they could not find a solution in a short period of time, the planet would probably be abandoned. The result of that was the forced destruction of the entire planet, and the planet would be erased from the League of Stars. Even if they hid in their own sanctuary, what would happen? While Mo was thinking of a way to deal with it, Silin, who was locked in the white cage, was also calculating the time to act. The first case of infection had just been discovered in the base where Silin was imprisoned. After that, more and more infected people appeared one after another. The people in the base, who were already nervous, were like a flock of frightened birds when the first infected appeared. The once orderly base was now in chaos. 90% of the work had been suspended. No one was in the mood to continue with the engineering experiment. Now, everyone was wholeheartedly thinking about how to avoid the unknown virus and the infected in the base. Everyone felt that the people around them were unreliable. Perhaps the person who walked past them was a carrier of the virus. Such thoughts quickly became deeply rooted in the minds of the researchers. They began to be wary of the people around them. Everyone wore protective suits and armed themselves to the teeth. However, those who were knowledgeable understood that the special team established had the best protective equipment and so on the entire planet. It was even the top research protective equipment of the entire Miracle Company. Moreover, the members of the team, even if it was just an assistant member, were absolute professionals who had worked in Miracle Company for many years. How could they be careless? Their isolation suits were not good enough? Their disinfection equipment was not advanced enough? No. That was definitely not the case. This was what made people afraid and uneasy. Even though they knew that the isolation suits on them might not be effective, and that they would be infected sooner or later, people always had a sliver of hope. They would rather deceive themselves than face the cruel reality. The researchers were not in the mood to pay attention, and the guards were all transferred to maintain order in the base. Beep! The white cages holding the captives were all opened. The soldiers who were originally in despair suddenly saw hope. They were happy and excited. Then, they desperately ran out. Although many of them had not recovered from their injuries, they could still take a few steps. The captives staggered toward the door. Those who were in better condition had already pushed aside the people in front of them and tried to open the door. Scylla was a little surprised when the cages were opened. The timing was wrong. It was 20 minutes earlier than planned. Although 20 minutes wasn't a long time, Cheto, Shusag, and the others shouldn't have arrived so quickly if everything went according to plan. Therefore, there was no way Cheto was the one who opened the cages. In other words, it was either Yulu or the person who opened the cages. Scylla didn't know if there were other parties involved. In any case, the cages were opened so that they could move ahead and make preparations. Scylla and the captives mingled together. The captives in front of the door were almost fighting over how to open it when the door opened on its own. The captives rushed out of the room and ran in different directions. They didn't know where the path led to, and they didn't listen to anyone's advice. Right now, they only had one thought in their mind, and that was to keep running. They didn't want to get caught by those people in lab coats or those armed weirdos again. The captives were weak and their injuries hadn't healed yet, so their escape speed was slower than usual. Scylla, on the other hand, quickly left the base quietly. However, he didn't leave the base right away. Scylla followed the impression he had when he first came in. He turned at the fork and arrived at a room that looked like it was used to hold captive. Before he could get close, the door to the room opened, and all the cages holding the genetically modified test subjects were opened. Needless to say, it must be the work of the people who opened the cell doors earlier. Scylla swiftly took out a gun that he had prepared a long time ago from the leaf-patterned ring and fired at the modifiers who were gradually awakening from their drugged state. The bullets fired from this gun would split into a dozen or so pellets after they were fired. Each pellet contained some carrier genes, and these carrier genes were what Scylla had extracted from the flies on the planet at Sector E who always fed on all kinds of drugs. He also added some key enzymes and other buffer drugs into each pellet. After the pellets were shot into the bodies of the modifiers, they would swiftly take effect due to the metabolic activity of the modifiers and cause them to become resistant to a lot of drugs. Normally, in genetic modification research projects, some drugs would be used to forcefully suppress the genetic modifiers. Otherwise, they would cause a lot of trouble if they were to awaken. The incomplete modifiers were unstable. They couldn't control their emotions, or in other words, their original emotions had been forcefully erased during the modification process. Therefore, the unsuccessful modifiers would enter a berserk state. Most of the finished modifiers had already been used in Miracle's own armed forces. Those big, fully armed men were the finished products of their research. However, Miracle wasn't satisfied with the abilities of these finished products. They hoped to carry out a second round of modification and strengthening on top of this foundation, and the ones in front of them were the test subjects for this second round of modification. Be it a normal person or a modified test subject, all of them would be infected with the virus. However, humans would panic and be at a loss because of this, but these modifiers wouldn't. They didn't possess such thoughts and emotions. They were like brainwashed people. Once they were told to do something, they would carry it out until they could no longer move. Due to the escape of the captives, the guards of the base would definitely rush over very soon. What Scylla needed to do was to let these incomplete modifiers fight against the initial modified ones. Otherwise, Scylla's movements would be restricted. Let the people of Miracle worry about it. The fully armed guards were already rushing over. Scylla sped up his movements. When the first incomplete modifier that had awakened rushed over, Scylla finished firing his last shot. He avoided the fist of the incomplete modifier and quickly escaped to the other side of the tunnel. Meanwhile, the few incomplete modifiers that had been preparing to chase after Scylla suddenly stopped in their tracks. They looked in the opposite direction of Scylla's escape. A large number of footsteps could be heard coming from that direction. The sound of footsteps stimulated these newly awakened modifiers even more. Confrontation, battle. Who was stronger, the initial genetic modification product or the incomplete secondary modification product that hadn't stabilized yet? Regardless of which side was stronger, Scylla didn't have the time to pay attention to it. His current goal wasn't this. He just wanted to let the incomplete modifiers fight against the guards of the base to buy time for him to act. There were still a few rooms where the incomplete modifiers were locked up. However, looking at the situation, Scylla couldn't deal with all of them in one go. He could only open fire when he bumped into any of them. The situation in the base was getting more and more chaotic. The panic brought about by the virus and the release of the captives, as well as the modified humans, had turned the already chaotic base into a mess. No one noticed that there was a guy like Scylla adding fuel to the fire. In another part of the base, on top of a box in a warehouse, a handsome man with short hair was sitting. That man was busy working on the machine in his hands. The opening of several cages in the base was his work. The walls of the warehouse flashed. A guy with a metallic luster and an indistinct face stepped out from the wall. "You're finally back. The information has been collected. We need to leave as soon as possible," the man sitting on the box said hurriedly. "How unlucky. I can't believe I ran into such a mess," the man who just walked out from the wall complained. If it weren't for the virus, they would have stayed here for a longer time to collect more information and cause trouble. Unfortunately, they ran into such a mess. "Hey, Liquid Silver, what if we get infected? Do we spread the virus to other people in the organization?" The man sitting on the box packed up his things and jumped to the ground. "Should we inform the organization in advance and prepare a funeral for us? Ugh, I don't want to die with you. Get out of here. Hey, what kind of attitude is that? Is this the tone you use to talk to a lady? Don't walk so fast. Tell me, how did I do? The speed at which I opened the prison door wasn't bad, right? How does it compare to my brother?" Liquid Silver, who already had one foot in the wall, didn't stop moving. He didn't even turn his head as he said, "Far from it. If it was Juno, completing what you did would only take half the time." "Nonsense, how could the difference be so big? Believe it or not. Hurry up, Stora is still waiting," Liquid Silver shouted. They walked out of the warehouse, turned a corner, and quietly bypassed a restaurant. The two came to a staff dormitory. The researcher in the lounge had already been injected with the drug and was sleeping soundly. On the bed in the dormitory, there was a young man sitting cross-legged with his chin in his hand. No one knew what he was thinking. "Hey, Stora, what are you thinking about? Hurry up and pack up and leave." Liquid Silver went over and kicked the guy who was sitting on the bed. Seeing the two come in, Sto stretched and moved his legs. "Judy, you're so slow." Liquid Silver gave Judy a look that said, "See, I told you." Judy snorted, turned around, and walked out. Liquid Silver and Stora followed. They had to leave this place as soon as possible. When the virus broke out, they injected themselves with a kind of potion. This potion would increase their body's resistance to the virus, but they were not sure if it could completely resist it. They could only go back first. There's no one there. I controlled the surveillance and checked. Judy pointed to one of the passages at the fork and said to the other two. The trio quickened their pace and entered the passage. However, they came to a halt after turning a corner. Not far in front of them stood two people. Although they had always tried to discourage Judy, they believed in her abilities. The organization wouldn't have assigned her the mission otherwise. However, the current situation proved that Judy had failed. These two people had the ability to avoid Judy's surveillance net, and they were adept at concealment. Otherwise, they would have noticed them already. Cheto and Shusag were still in disguise, so they weren't worried about being recorded by the enemy's surveillance system. Opposite them, Shusag was also puzzled. Which side did they belong to? According to Cheto, someone had modified the surveillance system and done something they hadn't gotten the chance to do yet. He wasn't expecting to run into them this soon. The standoff lasted less than 5 seconds before Liquid Silver waved his arm and fired several metal nails at Shusag and Cheto. Then, he flashed into the wall of the passage. Shusag extended a finger, but he didn't use his specialized finger bones. Instead, a metal claw-like glove covered his entire hand and deflected the incoming nails. At the same time, he spun around and grabbed a long spike sticking out of the wall with his other hand. It was Liquid Silver's hand that was attached to the other end of the spike. When Liquid Silver shot out the metal spikes, Judy retreated. She wanted to quickly retreat from the battle and give Liquid Silver and Stora space. Her presence would only limit Liquid Silver and Stora's abilities. This was how they cooperated. While Shusag was dealing with Liquid Silver, Cheto was dodging the flying nails. At the same time, Stola had also moved. Compared to Liquid Silver, Stola was much more quiet at the start. All he did was raise his hand. He simply raised his hand and fired a bullet at Cheto. Cheto blocked his forehead with his hand after dodging the flying nail. The bullet passed through his palm and went between his eyebrows. At the same time, Cheto was hit in 6 other places on his body, including his heart. He had fired 7 bullets in an instant, and every single one of them was deadly. But that wasn't the end. After the bullet pierced through Cheto, the person who was standing not far away from him appeared in front of him in a flash. From behind, it looked like Cheto had been pierced through by a ball of sharp knives. After this successful attack, Stola quickly retreated. At first, he was very confident in his marksmanship, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong with the person in front of him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, so he followed up with the next hit. His expression was stiff and serious. It was because the man who had been shot 7 times and looked like a hedgehog just now hadn't changed his expression in the slightest. Cheto put down his hand that had been pierced by the bullet and revealed the area between his eyebrows. There were still a couple of other bullet holes and stab wounds on his body, but they were closing up quickly. There was no trace of blood at all. Then, Cheto charged forward at a speed no slower than Stora's. Since the beginning, Stora had been on high alert. When Cheto moved, Cheto spread out a semicircle wall of blades in front of him and protected him behind it. Crack, 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 crack. The sound of metal snapping echoed crisply inside the tunnel. What was different from before was that the blades on the wall seemed to have collided with something harder than them, and they broke immediately. Cheto's fingers turned into claws and almost pierced through the wall. However, Cheto's movement suddenly came to a halt. Ignoring the man in front of him, he retreated back to Shusag's side. "Let's go." Shusag didn't want to fight either. He pushed aside the sharp needles and left the tunnel with Cheto. Just now, Cheto had received a message from Silen telling him to move ahead of schedule. Therefore, he didn't waste any more time with these people. After recording their information, Cheto and Shusag left to complete the next part of the operation. After watching Cheto leave, Stola looked at the blade wall he had unfolded. There was a claw mark on it, and the protruding claw mark was only a dozen or so centimeters away from him. Stola was just about to activate a protective shield when he didn't expect Cheto to suddenly stop. "Who are they? Are they Azrael's men?" Judy asked. As members of Wuxia, they knew their archenemy, the Mist, very well. They knew that the Mist didn't have the two people they saw just now. However, they didn't look like they were from the military, especially the guy Stora just fought. He was so powerful and mysterious that the only person Judy could think of was Azrael. Stora shook his head. "I don't know. Let's leave first. We'll talk about everything else when we get back," Liquid Silver said to Stora and Judy after he walked out of the wall. "Amen. Let's get out of here as soon as possible." Judy adjusted her mentality and followed Liquid Silver. After the trio left, a man walked out of a corner. It was none other than Yulu. Yulu scratched his head as he stared at the tunnel. "I didn't think I'd run into Wuxia's men here. But who were the other two people?" Yulu recognized Swood and his aide, but there was no way that the two people he saw just now were the real deal. It would have been hard to tell them apart if they hadn't fought each other. The brief confrontation just now was enough for Yulu to reject the idea that the man was Swood. Yulu stared at the brown spot on his hand and let out a sigh. What an unfortunate year. The base was in a state of panic due to the appearance of one infected person after another. Although the riot had been suppressed by the guards, it couldn't quell the growing panic in people's hearts. The most despairing thing was that all 9 large research bases around the world had been infected. No matter what protective measures the other bases took, in the end, there were still cases of infection in the bases. Then, there were rumors that a lot of infected people had lost consciousness. There were also rumors that one of the bases had already lost their consciousness. There were also rumors that brown speck was like a terrifying reminder. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning of the night. Chapter 357. From the appearance of the first infection to the current infection of all 9 large research bases around the world, it had only taken less than 4 hours. In just 4 hours, the unknown virus could spread so quickly. The first batch of people who were infected had almost lost the ability to move. They were like desperate people waiting for death, unable to find a bright way out, unable to see hope. The biggest hope was originally the specialized team formed by the planet's top virus researchers, but now the entire specialized team had sacrificed themselves. From life to death, it could happen in just a short moment. Now, however, this virus seemed to have prolonged the process of death. The people who were infected by the virus deeply felt the feeling of losing control of their bodies inch by inch, but their consciousness was still clear, and they could clearly feel the torturous process of helplessly waiting for death. In addition to the 9 large research bases on the planet, there were also problems at the spaceport and the patrol fleet. It was not a virus infection, but the spaceport and the patrol fleet had signal interference, and they could not ask for help from the outside world. In fact, they had been affected by electromagnetic waves 4 hours ago. At first, they thought that it was abnormal stellar activity or an electromagnetic storm caused by some special circumstances that affected the communication system. However, with the appearance of the unknown virus on the ground and the fall of the 9 large research bases one after another, the people outside the planet were also anxious. The people in charge of the 9 bases, the captain of the patrol fleet, and the chief administrator of the spaceport were now extremely busy. However, after all, there were a few senior management here. No matter how chaotic it was, they had to try their best to control the situation here. The 9 base leaders controlled the research bases, and the people in space did not allow anyone on the ground to escape from the planet. Even if the 9 people in charge did not say anything, the people in the spaceport and the patrol fleet knew what to do. They were now extremely glad that they were in space and not on the ground. Although the 9 bases on the ground usually researched their own projects, they were all interconnected. From time to time, there would be aircraft flying between the various bases, and they guessed that this was why all 9 bases were infected. If they were all isolated, it would probably be much better. The captain of the patrol fleet wrote his thoughts in the report, and when the technicians set up the communication equipment, they would send the information together with the report to the higher-ups. Maybe they would be promoted. It had to be said that the captain of the patrol fleet did not know the suffering of being outside. Compared to the patrolling fleet's wishful thinking, the people of the 9 bases on the ground fell into unprecedented panic, but they were suppressed by the guards, not daring to act recklessly. Even though Sillen had released a batch of incomplete modified humans, the number of completed guardians in the base was still the majority. It was more than enough to suppress the researchers. A few of the higher-ups suspected that someone had purposely created trouble to release the incomplete modified humans. Moreover, when they injected the drugs into the modified humans, they realized that the drugs did not have the same effect as before. The subsequent injections were even less effective, and the drugs could not suppress the modified humans at all. Some researchers took blood samples from the incomplete modified humans that were killed by the guards and found that these modified humans all had resistant substances in their bodies. It would have been fine if it was just one of them. After all, experimental breeds would occasionally mutate. However, the current situation was that a large portion of the incomplete modified breeds had developed resistance to the drug. Even if they did not develop absolute resistance, at least the effect of the drug would be greatly reduced. If this wasn't man-made, then there must be a ghost. But who did it? To have the ability to open the cages that held the test subjects in the bases and cause the incomplete modified humans to develop resistance. Perhaps this unknown virus was also man-made? The first few guesses were understandable, but many researchers did not believe that this unknown virus was man-made. Perhaps they were too conceited. They did not believe that anyone could create such a domineering virus. This virus that they could not do anything about and could not even find a solution to it. Even Miracle could not do anything about it, so who could create it? After all, Miracle was a famous and large company in the Star Alliance. The infection caused by the virus had not reached its worst state yet, and the noisy researchers were quickly suppressed by force. Coupled with the persuasion of some people who were good at talking, compared to the previous chaos, the situation had started to turn for the better. However, Sillen would not let them settle down so quickly. Just as the few higher-ups were temporarily relieved, a piece of music started playing in the 9 large research bases, including the patrol fleet in the sky and the spaceport. The pitter-patter of rain, accompanied by a soothing tune, seemed a little abrupt in such a situation. Everyone was very familiar with this song. This was a song produced by a famous composer hundreds of years ago, and it was also that writer's peak work, Rhapsody on a Rainy Night. This song recorded the composer's romantic feelings from bashfulness to passion on a rainy night. It touched people's hearts and made everyone who heard this song yearn for such a dreamy rainy night. After such a song was released, it stunned the entire League of Stars. At the same time, it also led to a trend of pursuing romance on rainy night. As one of the few works that had been passed down, Rhapsody on a Rainy Night still maintained its charm. Therefore, those who heard this song knew the name of this song when the first melody was played. But what was the meaning of playing this song now? In such a tense and chaotic moment, who would still want to pursue romance on a rainy night? At first, everyone thought that it was one of the tricks of the higher-ups, but what happened next made them realize that this was not the case. Drip, drip, it sounded like water droplets dripping from the eaves splashing into the puddles. However, those who were familiar with Rhapsody on a Rainy Night knew that there was no such drip sound in the original song. At the same time, in the 9 research bases on the ground, the patrol fleet in the sky, and the spaceport, whether they were in the research rooms, offices, or individual rooms, almost all of the optical screens and monitors in these places were flashing the same image, Against the pale background, a drop of brown water dripped like mud, splashing an oval spot on the screen, just like the spot that caused the symptoms of the virus. Drip, drip, every time there was a drip, a mud-like oval spot would splash on the screen. The soothing rhythm of the song was supposed to be a comfortable and soft style, a kind of comfort for emotions. But in the current situation, everyone felt as if an extremely cold icicle had swept across their spines, causing a shiver to run down their spines. As the song progressed, the passion and melancholy of the drizzle gradually faded away, and what followed was a gradual turn from calm to wild. In the background of the song, the sound of pedestrians running in the rain could be heard. The water droplets splashed up and fell into the puddles, and every drop seemed to smash into people's hearts, gradually activating the emotions in their hearts. The frequency of the drip gradually increased, and everyone's heartbeat seemed to change along with the rhythm of this sound. There were more and more spots on the screen, just like the process of the virus's infection. In the song, there was the wildness and passion of a storm, and the rapid drip sound was not followed by the usual excitement and passion of the audience, but boiling panic. Everything around them seemed to be hidden, and only this modified rhapsody on a rainy night could be heard. Everyone seemed to see brown raindrops falling, landing on their bodies, splashing brown spots. Every spot quickly consumed their nerves, and their bodies were numb and weak. Were they getting closer to death? No, they couldn't stay here. They would be splashed with raindrops. Escape. They must escape from here. The slow and fast sound of the raindrops, the suffocating tension, became stronger and stronger with this rhythm, causing the fear in their hearts to accumulate and accumulate. The eruption after the accumulation was the most crazy. Everyone was a combination of angel and devil. When fear suppressed reason, the angel would fall asleep, the devil would open his eyes, and people would start to go crazy. This was a kind of psychological suggestion, and a little hypnosis was used. Celine used audio interference and signal assimilation techniques, mixed with hypnosis and suggestive ticking rhythm, and turned such a famous song into a summoning music that awakened the devil in people's hearts. The tune that had stunned people for hundreds of years had exposed all the negative emotions in people. The devil had officially awakened. The situation that the higher-ups had suppressed with great difficulty erupted again, and it was even worse than before. If the composer knew that his masterpiece had such a function, it was unknown whether he would smile in the underworld, or wait for Celine to die of old age and risk his life. How many things could one person do? A lot. How much damage could a single person do? It was impossible to predict. This virus was nothing more than a virus that Celine had copied from the zebra virus's formation and pathogenesis mechanism. Celine had even lowered the threat level of the virus a little, because his goal wasn't to massacre everyone with a virus. Miracle Corporation was evil, but there were a lot of innocent people, soldiers and researchers like Embark who were under house arrest. That was why Celine had held back when he designed this virus. As for the deaths in certain bases, they were caused by internal strife. It had nothing to do with the virus. If Celine had spread the real zebra virus on this planet, and Celine hadn't taken out the antidote, the entire population on this planet would probably be wiped out. This planet would become the first place for the zebra virus to spread. Unlike the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the League of Stars didn't have large and powerful research departments like Black Viper or the RES. If the virus really did spread like this, it would take a very long time for it to invade all the planets in every sector. That would be a true large-scale massacre. There would be no smoke of war, no shadows of blades, but it would be far more destructive than an army. Virus researchers believed that a single virus could rival an entire League of Stars army. In the past, this was nothing more than a joke, because it was just a hypothesis. But if such a day really did come, wouldn't it be the end of the human race? At least for now, Celine didn't want to be a sinner. But if it was necessary, Celine didn't mind showing these people the truth. Although the virus looked very domineering and its symptoms were very scary, the truth was that the original virus Cylon had designed could actually die. The time of death would vary depending on the host's physique, but it would never be less than 24 hours. 4 hours had passed, and there were 20 hours left. 20 hours was more than enough. Chapter 358. In a certain place outside of the base, Liquid Silver, Judy, and Stora had already met up with Wuxia and the others who had infiltrated here. However, right now, these people were all abnormally silent. On the microcomputer screen in Judy's hand, brown specks dripped down like rainwater, accompanied by the increasingly passionate rhapsody on a rainy night. It wasn't that Judy wanted to see or listen to this, but rather because she had no choice. As soon as she turned it on, the screen would be filled with this scene. The microcomputer in her hand had already been invaded by that abnormal signal, a signal she had no way of stopping. This was the first time Judy had encountered this type of signal. Even when she was taught a lesson by her brother Juno in the past, she had never encountered a situation where she didn't even have the leeway to do anything. When the others saw Judy like this, they also understood that right now, Judy had no way of stopping this strange image and this famous song that had amazed people for hundreds of years, but now made people's blood run cold. "Just whose side is it?" one of them said in a low voice. Liquid Silver and Stora were silent. They knew that this matter was definitely related to the two people they encountered before, because not long after those two left, this image and music appeared. At that time, the other party left too suddenly. After all, in terms of strength, the other party wasn't weak. That was to say, the other party left in a hurry because of this matter. This definitely isn't the military's style. Those old foxes in the political world wouldn't do something like this either. After all, the implications behind Miracle are too great. They definitely wouldn't bring trouble for themselves in this kind of situation. However, apart from these two big heads, who else could it be? Another Wuxia person said. If it wasn't the military, not the political world, not Azrael, not Fog and not Wuxia, then who else could it be? It definitely couldn't be those boorish hunters, right? No matter who it was, after today those who experienced everything, especially those who were infected by the virus, if they could safely escape this disaster, when they heard Rhapsody on a Rainy Night in the future, their mood would definitely be completely different from before. Today's situation gave them a psychological hint. Moreover, rainy days would also form a psychological shadow. The sound of the raindrops would remind them of this terrifying experience. Such a shadow would also affect them for a long time. Alright, don't worry about that. No matter who it is, our priority now is to leave this place. Otherwise, we don't need to go back. We'll just stay here and feed the virus. One of Wuxia's men said as he patted Judy, who was staring at the holographic screen. Liquid Silver turned off Judy's microcomputer. Let's go. Juno isn't the only top player in the League of Stars. The League of Stars is so big, and there are many capable experts. It's just that some people are more low-key than Juno. If Juno was the one who set up the base's defense, perhaps this wouldn't have happened, Stora said. Back then, Juno had given an obsolete work to someone from Miracle, and they didn't continue working together after that. When the base was first established, they wanted Juno's help. However, Juno rejected them. Azrael's attitude had always been subtle, and no one could guess what they were thinking. Judy didn't say anything. She didn't refute or agree with Liquid Silver and Stora's words. Maybe Liquid Silver and the others didn't know much, but Judy knew that this abnormal signal alone was far beyond her ability to analyze. In fact, she couldn't even analyze the signal further. She couldn't copy it, so she could only watch obediently. Even if Juno herself was here, she might not be able to intercept it. While Judy and the others were puzzling over this abnormal signal, Huimao was crouching on top of a building in the base where Mo Heng was imprisoned. He was looking down at the ground and everything inside the base. He and Cheto had deactivated the defense network of the 9 bases. Right now, the chaos caused by Rhapsody on a Rainy Night was slowly heating up. A lot of infected people had already rushed out of the bases in an attempt to escape. While the Rhapsody on a Rainy Night feast was going on, Sillin had also arrived at the base where Mo Hung was imprisoned. With the help of Cheto and the others, Sillin was able to avoid the guards with ease. Sillin casually put on a set of work clothes, and he even made some brown spots on his body. Although most people in the base were wearing protective masks, and it was impossible to tell the difference from their faces, Sillin still did it anyway. It made it harder to arouse suspicion. Therefore, it would be very difficult to notice Sillin's difference in this chaotic environment without careful investigation. The guards of the base were very busy right now. Although there weren't any incomplete modifications in the base, there were robots and machines that hadn't been perfected yet. Moreover, these robots and machines took up a lot of space, so it would take the guards quite some time to deal with them. Following the route given in Mo Hung's encrypted message, Sillin headed over. The place where Mo Hung was imprisoned belonged to the key research department of the base. There were a lot fewer workers in this area, and it was a lot quieter. Most of the people who needed to run away had already left, and those who needed to isolate themselves had their doors tightly shut. Moreover, the modified protective shield had strengthened both the inside and the outside, so it was very difficult for outsiders to enter without some professional tools. The surveillance in this area had also been hacked, so Sillin wasn't worried that the managers of the base would notice anything amiss. The elevator had already stopped working, so Sillin had no choice but to climb up. However, when he climbed up to the third floor, a person ran down from the second floor. Perhaps he did not notice that there was a person climbing up here. He was unable to dodge in time. His foot missed, and he crashed straight into Sillin. If it wasn't for Sillin blocking his way, he probably would have rolled down the stairs already. The man didn't even raise his head. He was wearing a protective mask, so he couldn't see what was behind the mask. After he finally steadied himself, the man panted a couple of times and was about to continue walking down when his body suddenly felt light. Sillin had lifted him up with one hand and carried him down the stairs. The man didn't even scream. He just waved his hand and took out a pair of tweezers from God knows where to poke Sillin, but Sillin stopped him with his other hand. "Master Mo, aren't you tired?" Sillin asked as he ran down the stairs. Hearing this, Mo Hung, who was about to change his tweezers, stopped and looked at Sillin in confusion. It was different from what he remembered. Although he couldn't see the face, he could still see the difference in the shape of the body. It was very unfamiliar, but at this moment, the only thing that came to Mo Hung's mind was that little bastard Sillin. Was it Sillin? Was it? Who else but Sillin would directly call him Master instead of Mentor Mo? Mo Hung didn't ask, nor did he pull down Sillin's protective mask. It would be bad if he was recognized by people running around every now and then. Moreover, Mo Hung couldn't sense any malice from the man in front of him. Instead, he felt a sense of familiarity that he hadn't felt for a long time. Never mind, I'll think about it after I get out of here. In any case, it definitely isn't someone that bastard and Bishin sent. It's probably Sillin, I guess. Mo Hung thought to himself. Just like that, he quietly and obediently ran out of the base while being carried on his shoulder. But if it really was Sillin, Mo Hung was both happy and worried. Right now, the base and even the entire planet were in bad shape, and it would be terrible if they were infected. Right now, Sir Mo was extremely conflicted. He was looking forward to his disciple's return, but he didn't want to run into him in this virus-ravaged environment. While Sillin was sneaking out of the base with Mo Hung, he received a call from Cheto. "What's wrong?" Sillin didn't stop moving. At the same time, he was paying attention to his surroundings. Right now, most of the base's attention should be focused on a few places. The passage he was walking through right now was deserted, and the surveillance devices were down. Still, it was never wrong to be careful. "We've finished injecting the incomplete modifiers with the antidote, and the researchers are trying their best to escape from the base. However, there are too many guards, so I'm afraid they won't be able to hold out for too long. Should we proceed with the next step in advance? Cheto asked. Then let's move ahead. I've already found the person. We'll evacuate once we get out of here. Alright, I'll let Wheeze and the others know. Alright, there's one more thing I need to tell you. A group of people is approaching this planet right now. I don't know which side they're from. Sillin thinks for a moment before asking, can we get their identities verified? Nope. They don't seem to want to reveal their identities. In other words, they aren't Miracle's own people. That's true. Should we intercept them with the satellite array outside? No need. They're probably from the First Legion. Thinking back to Yulu, Sillin guessed that they were probably reinforcements from the First Legion. This was just as well. It would save them the trouble of having to act as a cover, and they could just leave the rest of the trouble to the First Legion. How much longer until they arrive? Sillin asked again. Half an hour. I'm almost out. Pick a spaceplane and get ready to leave. Got it. After ending the call, Sillin checked his surroundings and quickened his pace. Emoheng, who was being carried on Sillin's shoulder, frowned. Although the voice didn't sound like it, the tone, it was definitely Sillin's. Sigh, why did this little bastard have to come at a time like this? Emoheng couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. In the 9 bases, in front of the warehouse where spaceplanes and fighter jets were parked, many researchers who had lost control of their emotions were in conflict with the guard. The researchers wanted to leave the planet, but the people in charge of the bases wouldn't allow it. They kept the warehouse door tightly shut. As long as they couldn't get their spaceplanes out, they could only wander around the planet. There was still a chance to salvage the situation. However, once these researchers left, there was no telling when they would be able to return here to continue their research. Even if these researchers didn't know some of the core secrets, there were still some things that couldn't be known to the outside world. The people in charge would never allow these researchers to escape the planet. Every researcher had been implanted with a tracking chip, but there was no guarantee that the chip would not be destroyed. After all, there was no lack of experts among these researchers. The people in charge couldn't take the risk. Among the 9 people in charge of the bases, 7 of them had already developed pathological changes. They wanted to leave but didn't dare to. If they stayed, they might be able to wait for Miracle to send reinforcements, but if they left, they would definitely die. However, what made the people in charge go crazy was that the warehouse door opened on its own. Not only that, one of the spaceplanes rushed out and directly scattered the guards at the warehouse door. As soon as they saw this, the researchers seemed to be encouraged and rushed toward the warehouse with all their might. Some of the more agile ones had already opened the hatch of the spaceplane. In a place where no one was paying attention, a gray shadow flashed and quickly disappeared. Following that, similar situations happened in the other basic bases. Fighter jets and spaceplanes took off from the various bases. Stop them! At all costs! The person in charge shouted at the communicator that was connected to the patrol team and the people in the spaceport. What the person in charge meant was that they couldn't let these researchers escape the planet even if they had to blow all of them to smithereens in the end. However, the person in charge didn't get a response from the patrol team and the spaceport for a long time. The communicator could not be connected. At this moment, in the sky, be it the people from the patrol fleet or the people from the spaceport, they were also in a lot of trouble. Their instruments were being interfered with to varying degrees, and they were unable to control the satellite array to activate its attack mode. Most importantly, they knew that someone was approaching the planet, and it wasn't Miracle's people. When Sillin and Emoheng walked out of the base, Shusag happened to be flying a spaceplane toward them. He opened the hatch at the bottom of the spaceplane, and Sillin ran a couple of steps and jumped onto it. Cheto and Huimao were already safely inside the spaceplane. Huimao was crouching on top of a box at the cabin door, staring at Emoheng while wagging his tail leisurely. After entering the spaceplane, Sillin removed the protective cover on his face and took off his work uniform. After removing his protective mask, Emohing stared at Sillin for a moment before shooting a glance at the familiar cat next to him. Then, he reached out and pinched Sillin's face hard twice. "You've changed again, you little bastard. How did you know it was me? I didn't make a sound when we bumped into each other. How did this kid recognize me the moment we bumped into each other?" The corner of Sillin's mouth twitched. His face was pinched so hard that it looked a little deformed. "It feels like you. You don't need to make a sound. I can recognize you as soon as you move." Emohing nodded in satisfaction. But at the same time, he was very worried about the brown spots on Sillin's face. He wanted to bring Sillin to a few of his old friends who were in the field of virus research and medicine and see if they could do their best to treat it. He only had one precious disciple that he was satisfied with, and if something really happened to him because he tried to save him, Emohing would blame himself forever. Noticing Emohing's worry, Sillin said, "Don't worry, it's not fatal." Emohing's sad thoughts came to an abrupt halt. Then, he looked at Sillin for 2 seconds strangely and asked, "You're the one who created the virus?" Sillin nodded. "Who did it?" "Me." Emohing sat there and massaged his legs to catch his breath. He glanced at Sillin, then massaged his legs to catch his breath, and then glanced at Sillin again. After repeating this a few times, Emohing reached out with both hands to grab Sillin's face. "Tell me, why are you so popular?" Sillin. Looking at the old man, he was more than happy. "Weren't you locked up? How did you get out?" Sillin asked. Emohing let go of Sillin's face and sat down again. He said slowly and proudly, "Give me a box of tools and I can dismantle this base. Do you believe me?" "Yes, of course I do." Sillin had heard a lot of gossip about Emohing. When he was young, Emohing had done things like breaking into cars, doors, and aircraft. Especially after being bullied, he would not say anything in front of others, but would secretly kill them behind their back. He would often tamper with other people's aircraft or household machinery. Otherwise, those who knew Emohing well wouldn't have called him a senior academic ruffian. The people at the base shouldn't have left Emohing his toolbox if they wanted to lock him up. Sillin told Emohing to rest for a while and wake him up if something came up. After learning the true situation of this seemingly powerful virus, Emohing was no longer worried about the situation at the base. The old man had not slept well during this period of time. Emohing was really tired, so he quickly fell asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. "How is it?" Sillin asked Cheto after he arrived at the cockpit. "They're here." Cheto pointed at the image on the screen. It was showing the battle that had already begun in space, and the patrol ships that had been blasted into holes by the enemy's cannons looked especially miserable. How could they not be miserable? Many of the patrol ships' instruments were still being jammed, and the interference set up by Cheto and Hui Mao would last for a long time. "We weren't the ones who opened the warehouse doors at 4 bases, so the operation was cut down a lot," Cheto said. At the same time, he showed Sillin the images of the battle with Liquid Silver, Judy, and Stora. "I'm guessing they're involved too. Yulu might have interfered as well. Still, he could analyze these things after he left the base." Sillin told Shusag to fly the spaceplane away at full speed. The people from the army were used to direct methods, so there was no way they would miss out on an attack. This was the perfect opportunity for Sillin and the others to escape during the chaos. On the other side, Yulu had entered a few other bases after he left the base he was in. Not long after he took off, a line of text appeared on his communicator screen, informing him of the true situation of the Yulu virus. Yulu couldn't tell what he was feeling when he saw the message. They had originally planned to destroy this base and perish together with these people who had experimented on the soldiers of their army. Everyone would be infected anyway. However, the message revived Yulu's desire to die together with his enemies. The worst part was that there was a very, very cheap smiley face at the end of the message. Yulu wanted nothing more than to smash the screen with his fist. That was why Yulu went to a few other bases to collect more evidence. That way, he would have a reason to declare war against the Fifth Legion, and the reputation of the Fifth Legion would be greatly damaged. Although Yulu's illness wasn't enough to render him immobile, he was seriously tired after all this action. He flew the spaceplane to a place a certain distance away from the base, parked it, and leaned against the fuselage to rest. The morning light finally appeared. Yulu covered his face and smiled as he looked at the sky growing brighter and brighter. Then, he looked at the fading spots on his body and covered his face with a hand. A spaceplane that didn't belong to Miracle flew toward him from the sky. After it landed, a person jumped out and shouted at Yulu, "Are you dead?" Yulu looked up at the person and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I just came back to life." Chapter 359. Feng Haichao sat down next to Yulu when he saw the listless and miserable-looking Yulu covered in brown spots that looked like mudprint. He passed Yulu a cigarette and lit one himself. "You're looking for trouble, aren't you?" Feng Haichao teased. Yulu flicked his cigarette. "It's all right. I killed those spies, confirmed the whereabouts of the captured soldiers, and found some information. I have enough reason to apply for a transfer when I return." Feng Haichao punched Yulu's shoulder with a smile. "You'll be promoted when you return." Yulu said noncommittally, "You're acting on your own again. Aren't you afraid of getting beaten up when you return?" "Sure, I'm used to it. You should worry about yourself. You won't be able to take a few beatings when you return. But we won't be the ones getting beaten up this time." Feng Haichao pointed at another fighter flying in their direction and said, "That guy is here too. He's the one who organized this operation." "Knight? Even the Third Corps is here?" Although there were no obvious insignias on the fighter, the person who could organize such an operation and make Feng Haichao mention it in such a tone was undoubtedly Knight. "Not only that, the 4th and 7th Corps are here too." Feng Haichao appeared very happy at the mention of this. Yulu and Feng Haichao were in the 1st Corps, the 3rd Corps led by Knight and the Fiegler family, the 4th Corps led by the G family, and the 7th Corps of the CI family could be considered allies now. Knight proposed to form a special operation team, but Yulu wasn't around when he went looking for him. In the end, they found out that he might have been captured. Others might not know what Miracle had done to the captives, but Knight definitely knew. He immediately summoned a group of people to kill them. It was impossible for the higher-ups of the 3rd Corps to not know of Knight's private actions. In other words, they had tacitly approved and were protecting him from behind. "Oh right, what's with these spots on your body?" Feng Haichao pointed at the brown spots on Yulu's face and hands. The spots were starting to fade, but could still be seen clearly. "They're caused by a virus," Yulu said quietly. "Cough cough." Feng Haichao choked on his cigarette when he heard Yulu say virus. He coughed a few times before he recovered. "Virus? What virus? Miracle was created by those perverts? Are you really going to die soon?" "It's not Miracle's fault. Didn't you notice that Miracle's people were infected as well?" Feng Haichao did not say anything. He really did not notice. Many of the people he saw were wrapped from head to toe, as if they were in a biochemical laboratory. Feng Haichao did not pay attention to those who were not wearing protective clothing. "Don't worry, it's fine. It'll be over in a few hours. It's just a prank." "A prank? Who would make such a thing to scare people?" "This isn't just scaring people. Since that person can create this kind of virus, he can definitely create a real deadly virus." Yulu told Feng Haichao about some of the things that happened before. "So fierce? Which side are they from?" Feng Haichao frowned. If that person really had the ability to create such an extremely lethal virus, wouldn't a large number of people die if it was spread? Even Miracle's people couldn't do anything about it, so amateurs like them would be even more clueless. War was fine, but against those invisible viruses. Feng Haichao looked at the spots on Yulu's body and thought of the scene where Rhapsody on a Rainy Night was playing. He shuddered. Another fighter plane landed here. Knight, who was wearing an old military uniform without any army insignia, jumped out and looked at Yu Lu. "What's wrong with your face?" "I got infected." Feng Haichao told Knight about Yu Lu's explanation just now. Knowing that the virus was not life-threatening, Knight was relieved. He took the cigarette from Feng Haichao and sat down to listen to Yu Lu's recount of what happened earlier. Yu Lu took a puff and sighed. "I'm a sharpshooter, but I don't have the ability to shoot viruses. No matter how good my marksmanship is, I'll still get infected." Knight did not know what was on his mind, but he remained silent. "Yu Lu, this reminds me of something I've heard before." Feng Haichao put out his cigarette. "Do you remember how that skeleton king died?" It had been a few years since that incident. Yu Lu thought for a moment and replied, "The secret case's explanation was parasites. I'm just not sure what happened." "I've heard of this before. It seems like, that's enough." Knight interrupted Feng Haichao's words and said, "Someone will specially investigate this matter." What he meant was, don't think about it anymore. When Feng Haichao and Yu Lu heard Knight's words, they understood in their hearts that there must be some connection. Knight knew something but did not want to say it. Who was he trying to protect? After Feng Haichao took off with Yu Lu in the fighter plane, Knight turned on his communicator. "Have you found Mo Heng?" "No, the door over there was pried open. It was done very skillfully. It should be old Mo's doing. However, all the surveillance cameras around there have been tampered with. There's no record of it at all. There's no sign of old Mo around the base." "Continue with the original plan." "Yes." It was only after the communication was cut off that Knight flew away. The fighters and spaceplanes in the sky began to bombard the base. This time, they were really going all out. On the other hand, Silen and the others took the opportunity to fly out of the planet and head towards the prearranged route while the group of people were fighting the patrolling fleets around the planet. Shi Huajing's men would be there to receive them. With Shi Huajing's help, everything went relatively smoothly. Although it took a little longer, and it was a little troublesome to switch spaceplanes or starships midway. In the end, Silen returned to Sector A. He would leave through Sector A later. This way, he could deceive the public. Shi Huajing was capable. Now that Jiu Sun was no longer complaining about leaving, and had even asked Shi Huajing to move his things over, he was ready to help Shi Huajing. With Jiu Sun's abilities, he could be of great help to Shi Huajing. Therefore, when Silen saw Shi Huajing again, the guy looked like he was in a good mood. People with a master watching over them were different. "It looks like everything is going well. Old Mo looks good and energetic." Shi Huajing glanced at Mo Heng, who was harassing Hui Mao tirelessly, and said to Silen. On the other side, Mo Heng was fiddling with the long hair on Hui Mao's ear with a thin blade of grass he pulled out of nowhere. Hui Mao ignored him, curled into a ball and continued to catch up on his sleep. His ears flicked away the grass, and he didn't even bother to open his eyes. Silen shot a glance at the other side, but didn't say anything. One had just woken up, and the other had just fallen asleep. That's what they looked like. "Do you know these three people?" Silen showed Shi Huajing the images of Liquid Silver and the others. "I have a slight impression of them. Give me a moment, I'll go look into them." Shi Huajing contacted a couple of people and went to investigate. 5 minutes later, Shi Huajing passed assorted information to Silen. "I didn't think that Wuxia would target that place. Did they take anything? As far as I know, there shouldn't be any special results from that base at this stage." "I'm not sure about that." Silen stared at the information in his hand and pondered the purpose of Wuxia, especially Judy's introduction. Azrael's member Juno's sister? He had never heard of Azrael and Wuxia being close. There were even rumors that the two had clashed before. Those people do whatever they want. Judy and Juno may be brother and sister, but that doesn't mean they have a good relationship. Or maybe the relationship between Azrael and Wuxia isn't as bad as people say. Shi Huajing said. After returning to the Shi family, he had seen a lot of people and things, especially Sector A, which was full of politics and power struggles. Naturally, he could understand more. Other than the exchange of interests, everything else was bullsh*t. Silen memorized the information and deleted the information Shi Huajing had given him. Whatever. I'll leave as soon as possible. I've already made the necessary arrangements. You can depart tomorrow. Amen. Oh right, Miracle's base may not be over so soon. You should make some preparations in advance. Silen said. You mean the military's investigation? More than that. At most, the military will push the blame onto a civil war between their corps or Wuxia. Then you mean, watch out for the media. Shi Huajing narrowed his eyes. Right now, the media only cared about self-preservation and didn't want to offend anyone. Who would have the guts to expose Miracle? Doing so would offend several parties at once. All right, I'll remember that. Shi Huajing knew that Silen must have his reasons for saying this. At the same time, he was reminding himself that he could use the upcoming events to make some preparations if necessary. After staying at the place Shi Huajing arranged for a night, Silen and his men left Sector A with Shi Huajing's help. Other than Shi Huajing and a very few people, no one knew that the captain of Vanguard's 11th Squad had slipped into Sector C and caused such a ruckus. Many of the big shots behind Miracle's base had received the news, but until now, no one had found the culprit. Some said that Wuxia's men were the culprit, and that the investigators who worked with Knight found traces of Judy's usual intrusion in the system. However, others said that Judy wouldn't be stupid enough to leave traces behind unless she did it on purpose. Judging from the situation this time, she must have been set up. However, even if she was set up, it couldn't be denied that Judy had hacked into the base's system. It didn't matter who had attacked or released the virus before Knight and his men arrived at Miracle's base. The ones who had bombed the base in the end were the people of the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 7th Legions. After this, there would definitely be another battle between the 8 legions. On the day Mo Hung left Sector A with Silen, Mo Qing stared at the message on the screen in a certain war zone commander's office in the 7th Legion of Sector C. He was speechless for a long time. There was a sentence on the screen in front of Mo Qing, and it was a text message formed after 3 layers of decoding. It was written in Mo Heng's usual coding style, and Mo Qing was very familiar with it. However, what made Mo Qing speechless was the content of the message. After Mo Heng was taken away from 7 Lights by the people from Miracle, Mo Qing had been handling the situation calmly on the surface, but he was actually anxious inside. He did as his old master wished and ignored Miracle's threats, but not a single day had gone by where he could be at ease. He learned about Knight's operation later on, but the news Knight asked C.I. Jincheng to bring back worried him a little. You didn't find him? Commander Mo's hanging heart rose even higher than before. Until he saw the message in front of him. I'm safe and sound. Don't worry about me, father. If it was anyone else who saw this message, they would interpret it as, son, I'm very safe right now. Don't worry, there's no need to restrain yourself. Just fight. However, according to Mo Qing's understanding of his old man, it should be, son, you have a lot of things to do, so don't worry about me. I'll go back when I'm done playing. Commander Mo felt a headache coming on when he saw the message. His old man really was a worrisome person. On the other side, Silen and the others had left Sector C under Shi Huajing's arrangements and finally returned to the 11th Squad's starship. Mo Heng's plan was exactly the same as Mo Qing's. He was going to stay with Silen's 11th Squad for the time being. It wasn't safe to go anywhere right now, so he might as well stay with his disciple. At least he could spar with his disciple when he felt depressed. On the day Silen met up with the 11th Squad, a third of the League of Stars' contribution points and above reported the same thing. Miracle Corporation was using captured soldiers for research. Moreover, there were several videos, all of which were rather tragic images of the experimental process. Along with these videos, there were also explanations of the various drugs used in the experimental process. Some of them would cause toxic side effects, some would directly kill your nerves, and every single one of the videos was enough to make people shudder in fear. For a time, many people didn't dare to buy Miracle Corporation's drugs carelessly. It was true that increasing one's genetic rank was important, but their lives were even more important. Moreover, the videos had a very strong psychological effect on a lot of people, and they couldn't help but think that they would turn into those experimental soldiers if they used Miracle Corporation's drugs. The core and some political groups that supported Miracle were currently under a lot of pressure. This matter had already affected the emotions of the soldiers, especially the reputation of the Fifth Corps. They were being scolded quite a bit. The Corps' soldiers were all from different sectors, and if they wanted to strengthen their corps, they had to recruit new soldiers from other sectors. However, the people from other sectors had a terrible impression of the 5th Legion right now. What was the point of a corps that didn't even treat its soldiers like human beings? Before the division, the 8 corps shared a single name, the League of Stars Army. Therefore, they were once comrades, and now that they were willing to use their former comrades for their inhumane experiments, there was no telling if they would do the same to their own soldiers in the future. Who would be willing to do that? Shi Huajing looked at the media reports and felt that it was quite interesting. Although the media claimed that they weren't the ones who reported it, it was the truth. It was pointless even if they cried injustice. Other than Judy, Sillin and the others were involved in the hacking of the media as well. Some of the analysis data was even added by Sillin himself, adding fuel to the fire from behind the scenes. The 1st Legion and the 2 Corps that Knight and Ci Jincheng were definitely doing something as well. They were more than happy to attack the 5th Legion. Just as Sillin was paying attention to this debate, he received a call from Lung. "You're the one who did this, aren't you?" Lung asked directly the moment the call connected. "Not entirely." Sillin didn't deny it. Lung had a hand in this media incident as well. For example, Unlimited and Lavish, which had more than 80 contribution points, and Stars of Tomorrow and Prospect, which had more than 60 contribution points, were probably Lung's handiwork. "Hey Sillin, are you busy lately?" Lung asked. "What is it? Is something the matter?" "There's something I want to talk to you about. I want to see if you're interested." "What is it?" "I'm planning to visit Ocean Paradise." Ocean Paradise wasn't as beautiful as its name sounded. Ocean Paradise was one of the famous danger zones in the League of Stars. It was a gigantic planet, and the planet was completely covered in the sea. Ocean Paradise's sea bred many large wild beasts, and the planet had a strange magnetic field. Many aircrafts couldn't get close to the planet at all, and all electronic devices would malfunction the moment they got close to it. Even though there were many miraculous and rare minerals in Ocean Paradise, not many people went there, and there were even fewer who could return safely. Even the 4 great hunter regiments didn't want to go there. That was why Sillin was very surprised when he heard Lung's words. "What are you going there for?" "I want to find something there. I can't bring too many people, and I can't attract attention." Sillin thinks for a moment. He really wanted to go there himself. When he told Lung about the place he wanted to go, he mentioned Ocean Paradise before. Lung remembered the conversation at the time, and that was why he told him about it. Moreover, the Andryra family was definitely capable of getting their hands on the most suitable equipment to travel to Ocean Paradise. This was a good opportunity for him. There were a couple of ores Sillin had been looking for but couldn't find in Ocean Paradise for a long time, so it was a great opportunity for him to go there. If he missed this opportunity, the 11th Squad would never be able to go there with their current funds and equipment. "Think about it first. I'm still making preparations, so just give me an answer in 3 days," Lung said. Ocean Paradise was a famous danger zone after all, and Lung didn't want Silin to make a decision so easily. He needed to weigh the pros and cons first. All right, I'll make the arrangements. After ending the call with Lung, Silin decided that it would be best to bring Cheto and Huimao with him if he wanted to go to Ocean Paradise. Even Shusag wouldn't be able to make much use of his strength in an environment like Ocean Paradise. When he walked out of the room, Silin ran into a frustrated Mo-heng. Ever since Sir Mo came to the 11th squad, he had been obsessed with playing chain stars against Shimu. However, he had never won a single one of them. He lost every time on the 5th level. Judging from his expression, it looked like he was stuck at the same place again. You're a captain at the end of the day, kid. Why are you acting like you're fine all the time? Come on, let's go assemble the part. Mo-heng vented his frustration of losing the game directly on assembling the parts, and Silin just so happened to run into the muzzle this time. Silin and Mo-heng sat down at the table and started assembling the parts. When he was done, Silin put the machine in his hands to the side and said, "Master Mo, I'm going to visit Ocean Paradise." Snap! Mo-heng snapped the machine in his hands in half. Chapter 360. Mo-heng tossed the two halves of the machine onto the table without saying a word. However, the aura around him told everyone that he was very angry right now. Silin glanced at the silent Mo-heng and continued, "I'm looking for a couple of ores, and Sea Paradise has them. Right now, the party is in dire need of materials for development, and there are a lot of them that we can't buy at all right now. Even if we could, the exorbitant price isn't something we can afford. We are hunters to begin with, and hunters will get whatever they need if they can." Silin analyzed the situation from the 11th Squad's perspective to his own. Then, he explained his reasons for going to Sea Paradise. A moment of silence later, Mo-heng looked up and said to Silin, "Is that all? This is a very good opportunity." Silin did not tell Mo-heng about Lung's arrangement. Lung himself had said that he didn't want anyone to know about it. The reason Silin told Mo-heng that he was going to Sea Paradise was because he believed that Mo-heng wouldn't tell anyone else. Mo-heng tapped the table and pushed the parts in front of him to the side. Then, he propped his arms on the table and looked at Silin. "Tell me the truth. Is it because of Yu Linglong?" "Ah." Silin looked confused. "Why did Yu Linglong get involved?" Mo-heng relaxed a lot when he saw Silin's expression. "It's fine as long as it's not because of Yu Linglong." "Why would you think of her?" Silin asked curiously. "It's nothing. Silin, if you're looking for a wife, I still don't think that Yu Linglong is suitable for you. You worry too much." There were some things that Mo-heng hadn't told Silin earlier, but Silin had learned some of them from Shi Huajing. The person who took Mo-heng away from Seven Lights was Yu Linglong. The fact that Yu Linglong led her men to capture Mo-heng didn't mean that she was bad to Mo-heng. On the contrary, it was a form of protection. If someone else from the Yu family had carried out the mission, Mo-heng might have suffered a lot. But no matter what, Yu Linglong had done it. She had chosen to bring Mo-heng to Miracle. Yu Linglong is collecting DH50 black ore, and the resources for DH50 black ore in the League of Stars are pitifully low. No one is willing to go to Ocean Heaven. The two groups of people she sent to Ocean Heaven were completely wiped out, Mo-heng said. Not only was she explaining why she had asked those questions, but she was also telling Silin that Sea Paradise was indeed a dangerous place, and it was best not to go there. But he also understood that once Silin had made up his mind, there was nothing he could do to change his mind. "Okay, I'll be careful." The DH50 black ore was indeed a part of Silin's plan. But it had nothing to do with Yu Linglong. The ore was numbered DH50 and was known as the Black Oregon. In fact, this ore wasn't really black. It was just that its blue color was too deep, so deep that it was hard to tell it was blue. Moreover, this ore didn't have any other colors, so people always called it black ore. In a dark environment, the natural DH50 black ore would sometimes emit a blue light spontaneously. Moreover, the light would follow a rhythm, as if it was breathing. Therefore, the DH50 black ore was also known as the ghost of the sea. The older the DH50 black ore, the faster its breathing rate, and when there was light in the environment, it would tightly absorb the light. This kind of ore would glow red under ultraviolet light. This was also one of the easiest ways to identify this ore. The DH50 black ore was very hard and was mostly used in space equipment, as well as some aircrafts and aircraft. The alloy of the DH50 black ore was added to the material, making it several times harder than before. It was perfect for defense. Hearing Silen's calm tone that made people want to slap him, Emoheng got up and slammed the table. "What's the use of being careful? Don't you know that the magnetic field of Sea Paradise has been getting weirder and weirder? A few decades ago we could still use some equipment to investigate it, but now we can't get close at all. Also, from the changes in the magnetic field, the sea beasts there must be stronger. If you go in, you'll only have limited weapons. If you run into the sea beasts, you won't even be enough to fill the gaps between their teeth." Emoheng hadn't actually been to Sea Paradise, but there were people from the League of Stars Research Institute who specialized in Sea Paradise. Emoheng had learned about this famous dangerous place from them. Silen paused. He didn't directly answer the question about the magnetic field and the sea beast. Instead, he asked, "Do you know the star hunter Osculos? Although I'm not a hunter, I've heard of Osculos's famous old man. The main material for Osculos's knife was found in Sea Paradise, but he went looking for it himself. I've never heard of anyone else who found the same material." As expected, it was just as Silen had guessed. "You've already made up your mind, so I can't change it. However, you have to know your limit. Don't try to show off. Finding the ores is secondary. The most important thing is to stay alive." I know. "Alright, Master Mo, if I can find some good materials, will you help us build a fighter?" Emoheng raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you're thinking, kid? That's not the main point. But I do want the 11th squad to have their own fighter." It wasn't hard to get a fighter, but it wasn't easy to get a good one, especially one that was suitable for a hunter. "Alright, I'll definitely help you when you come back safely. Consider it a contribution to your squad. I can't just stay here for nothing." Emoheng felt an itch in his heart. Ever since he found out about Shikai and Shimu, he'd been looking forward to working with them. That way, he'd be able to get to know Shikai and Shimu better. The two of them, especially that white-haired brat, had piqued his interest. After chatting with Emoheng for a bit, Silen went to check on the other squad members. The newcomers assimilated into the team very quickly. A hunter's teamwork was forged through continuous quests, and while Silen was gone, the rest of the 11th squad worked well together during their quests without any hiccups. Tang Qiuqiu could already use the Purgatory Thunder Snake E very well, but she couldn't use the Purgatory Thunder Snake K just yet. She couldn't control the Purgatory Thunder Snake K with her current physical condition. Silen had collected some relevant information while he was at Miracle's base, and he was trying to think of a solution for Tang Qiuqiu. "There's a fight going on over at the division." Yudi handed a new report to Silen. Thanks to the media, the 5th Division and the forces behind Miracle were under a lot of pressure. After a period of suppression, they finally erupted. In fact, everyone in the division was ready to go to war at any moment. It was just that they didn't have the opportunity to do so. Miracle's incident gave them an excuse to start a war. Sector C isn't the only sector that's affected by the war. Some local government forces are joining the fray as well. A lot of hunter regiments are avoiding the war, so why don't we find a quieter place to hide for a while? Yudi asked. "Where's the mission schedule we gave you last time?" Silen asked. "I'll give it to you." Yudi passed the list to Silen. Most of the missions on the list were located in secluded places, and only a few of them had been completed so far. Silin wanted the 11th Squad to complete the follow-up missions and avoid the war. While doing so, Silin circled a few missions and marked them with a different symbol. Then, he passed them back to Yudi. "I'll be heading out again soon. Let's rest for a while, and then we'll start following the missions listed on the list. The circled missions will take priority, and if I'm not back by then, you may continue following the marked missions." "You're going out again?" Yudi exclaimed. He had been a hunter for a long time, but he had never met a captain like Silin before. "Yeah, I'm going to look for something useful for our development." "Where are you going?" "See paradise." Yudi held his forehead. No wonder Silin didn't want the 11th Squad to participate in the war. He was going to that dangerous land. "Is the plan ready?" Yudi asked. "All right, I'll leave in 10 days. Silin had already contacted Lung, and according to the ephemeris, Silin would visit Sector H 10 days later to find Lung. Of course, Silin wouldn't be idle during these 10 days. While Silin and Yudi were discussing their future plans, a figure suddenly ran out from the corner of the passage. When he saw Silin and Yudi, he hurriedly came to a halt, paused for a moment and jogged toward Silin. Mogaz and Carrie also came to a halt and let out a dry chuckle. Then, they turned around and ran away. "Oh, Commander, Lieutenant Commander! You're all here." The figure running at the front hurriedly ran toward them like they were their saviors. Silin looked at the man standing in front of him, who looked a little reserved, just like him. No, he should call it a robot. This robot was Silin's substitute, X7. When Silin left the team for something and didn't want outsiders to know about it, X7 would take Silin's place and show up in front of outsiders. When Silin went to rescue Moheng, X7 was the one who replaced Silin. When the team was out hunting, mining, and trading, X7 would appear in front of outsiders. X7 wasn't an original robot, and it was much weaker than Sigma and the others. However, compared to other robots, X7 was very good. Among the new batch of X-series robots Shikai created, X7 was the only one with a free attribute. It was a random change in programming, and its occurrence rate was less than 1 in 1,000. That was why Shikai almost burst into tears when he saw the robot with the serial number X7. It was the closest robot he had ever created to an original robot. X7's appearance forced Shikai to cancel the substitute robot he had prepared for Silin. After all, a robot that was closer to an original would be a lot more convincing in front of outsiders. After that, Shimu upgraded X7 several times to make it more alive. Although it didn't have the terrifying learning ability and self-awareness of Sigma and the others, it was still a rare trait among robots. That was why X7 became Silin's full-time substitute in the 11th Squad. When X7 was outside, it would activate a set of procedures that made it look very similar to Silin's personality. Coupled with the fact that they looked exactly the same, no one noticed anything amiss even when they were doing business at the trading center. However, unlike Selene, the real leader, when there were no outsiders around, X7 would always be bullied by the other team members. Carrie and the others even made it do funny faces because it was too difficult to make Silin do that, so no one dared to mess with Silin. "Little 7, what do they usually make you do?" Silin asked. X7 searched through its program records and answered, "Make faces, sing love songs, walk upside down, break dance, Silin." "Ahem, actually, everyone was just joking around to relax a little," Yudi said weakly. "Should I be glad that they didn't make X7 do striptease and pole dance then?" Yudi fell silent. He thought, "Carrie, you guys better pray for yourselves." X7 put on an innocent face and said, "Captain, Moon said he's going to finish the program soon, and I'm going to upgrade it." Silin looked at Yudi. Yudi remained silent. Good luck to you too." That day, Carrie and Mogaz were summoned by Silin to the training ground for a good sparring. Ayu's newly created visual imaging tool for viewing small X-rays was confiscated from him. Moon tried to persuade Silin to get the imaging tool back, but the only response he got was a closed door. Silin wanted to solve Tang Qiuqiu's problem before he went to Lung. To be on the safe side, he didn't want to go too extreme. He wanted to improve the drug according to Tang Qiuqiu's body and physiological indicators. Different people's bodies would react differently to the same drug. Perhaps the drug would be more stable for others, but it might not be the same for others. When it came to the evolution of genes, Silin had a deep understanding of them. There were things that needed to be paid attention to during the evolution process, such as the activation of the gene silencing region, the rate of DNA unwinding and the degree of helicization, and the assembly of genes and proteins under the stimulation of drugs. Silin did not want to play around with Tang Qiuqiu's life, so he was extremely careful with every step he took. He would only proceed to the next step after he was certain that this step would not cause serious harm to Tang Qiuqiu. During this time, Tang Qiuqiu also stayed in the workshop. After Silin gave Tang Qiuqiu the first injection, he observed Tang Qiuqiu's reaction. There would still be pain caused by the body's rejection, but it would be fine as long as she endured it. Apart from this, nothing unexpected happened. The first step was to wait for Tang Qiuqiu to adapt, and then Silin would carry out the second injection. Then, he would use the drug to induce genetic evolution step by step. He didn't want it to be fast, but stable. On the 10th day, Tang Qiuqiu received the third injection, and her gene rank had gradually evolved to B rank. Let's do this for now. When the gene is completely stable, you can start developing your current gene rank. The better the foundation, the easier the next step of evolution. Your gene was already very good when it was C rank, unlike some people. Although they were also C rank, they couldn't withstand such an induced evolution process. So, you should be glad, but you can't relax, Silin said to the excited Tang Qiuqiu. I know. Tang Qiuqiu looked at the bee on the machine, especially excited. After leaving the workshop, Tang Qiuqiu couldn't wait to go to the shooting room to test her skills. In the past, she felt that controlling the Purgatory Thunder Snake was her limit, but now she realized that she could easily control the gun. Silin gave the K to Tang Qiuqiu. She might not be able to control it well, but she could use it to train herself and feel the limits of her body. When Silin finally came out, Moon followed beside Silin with a pitiful look. You want your tools back? Silin asked. Yes. Moon nodded quickly. The materials he had were only enough to create a set of recording tools. After Silin took them away, there was nothing else he could do. Come here. Silin waved his hand and asked Moon to follow him into the lounge. Moon's tools were placed in Silin's lounge. As soon as he entered, Moon grabbed the pile of tools, silently telling Silin, I won't let go no matter what. Moon, what is the God's tear in a Lillo's cage that represents reform? Silin asked. The God's tear was one of the 5 Alillos. Back then, Silin had obtained a star map fragment called the God's Tear from Gaidar, but he never had the chance to give it to Lung. This time, he might as well give it to Lung. However, Silin had a feeling that Lung's operation this time was probably related to the God's Tear. The God's Tear? Moon's arm didn't loosen its grip on the pile of tools. He turned his head and narrowed the blue bar on his face. It's a kind of medicine. Medicine? Yes, it's a medicine that allows the throat to split into a special organ. The Shi family created it after studying a large number of sea beasts. However, the medicine isn't very effective if it's used by the general population. If it's used by some of the ancient races in Sector H, the effect will be much better, and the success rate of splitting will be much higher. Moon told Silin about the God's Tear briefly, but he didn't know any more details than that. This was because the 5 robots weren't even born when the God's Tear was created. After learning the information he needed, Silin prepared to depart. He had already arranged everything here at the 11th Squad, and he had X7 as his substitute. He didn't have to worry about anyone noticing that the 11th Squad's commander had left the squad. Bringing Cheto and Huimao with him, Sillen headed to the place Lung told him about at Sector 8. At a tall building at the city center of a prosperous planet in Sector H, Sillen walked into a room. On the sofa in the living room, young Master Lung occupied the entire sofa and sat there casually. "Long time no see, old friend." Lung stood up and bumped fists with Sillen. Then, he pointed at the seat next to him and motioned for Sillen to sit down. He then took out a plate of fish biscuits he had prepared beforehand and placed it on the table for Hui Mao to grind his teeth. After checking the time, Lung said to Sillen, "Wait a little longer. Someone's coming. My grandpa sent them." The people around the famous old fox in the Star Alliance were definitely not simple. He wondered if he would become like that famous old fox because of what he had seen and heard. Half an hour later, a serious-looking man dressed in formal attire and carrying a black suitcase walked into the room. When Lung saw the man, he sat down on the sofa and greeted him. "Aha, you must be Ing Weiji, one of the old master's top 10 bodyguards, am I right?" The serious-looking Ing Weiji looked at Lung and answered, "My name is Ing Weiji, young master. Not Ji, right?" Sillen. As expected, the personality of the Andryra family's bodyguards couldn't be judged by appearances. Chapter 361. Lung didn't bring a lot of people with him this time. Just like he said, he didn't want to make it public this time. When Sillen arrived, there were 2 other people in the room other than Lung. However, both of them were playing games, and they only glanced at Sillen when he came in. Including Ing Weiji, Sillen only saw 3 subordinates from the Andryra family. The little old man Berzet didn't follow them. In many people's eyes, Berzet was Lung's personal butler. Therefore, compared to Lung, who was always unreliable, more people would pay attention to Berzet's movements and speculate Lung's movements. This time, Berzet didn't follow them, most likely because he was doing some cover-up to prevent others from discovering Lung's true intentions. "You're only bringing 3 people?" Sillen looked at Lung. Sea Paradise was a famous danger zone after all. This wasn't the same as when they went to Sector S back then, where only 2 people with good equipment would suffice. Furthermore, they were about to go to Sea Paradise, a place that even the 4 great hunter regiments avoided. Compared to Andrea's usual style of doing things, Lung had brought a little too few people with him this time. Lung scratched his hair that looked like a chicken nest from sleep and said, "There are a few more. Not including you, I'm bringing 10 people in total." These 10 people were the most suitable people to go to Sea Paradise. They were completely trustworthy and strong. Normally, their combat strength might not be able to rank among the top few in the Andryra family, but in a seawater environment it was hard to say. Lung looked at Cheto, who was sitting quietly at the side, and Hui Mao, who was squatting on the table and chewing fish biscuits. He said, "Why do I feel like the 10 people I'm bringing are inferior to the 2 you're bringing?" The moment Lung said this, the 2 people who were playing games looked up at Cheto and Hui Mao at the same time. Not far away, Ing Weiji, who was arranging the things inside his suitcase, also stopped what he was doing. 3 pairs of probing eyes shot straight at Cheto and Hui Mao, but of the 2 people they were looking at, one was still sitting quietly and reading the news with a local newspaper in his hand, and the other was eating with a mouth full of crumbs. He didn't even raise his head, and his ears only moved slightly when the 3 pairs of eyes looked at him. Right at this moment, another 3 people came in through the door. They were 3 of the 10 people Lung had prepared to bring this time. Just now, these 3 people went out to buy things. Among the 3 of them, there was one that Sillen had a slight impression of. It was a tamer that he had fought before. Sillen remembered that this tamer was very fast in the sea, and he was not an ordinary human. Sillen remembered that this person had revealed his tentacles when he was swimming at high speed in the sea. When Pescado walked through the door, he felt that the atmosphere was a little off. There were 2 people he didn't know, and his companion was looking at one of them with inquisitive and dissatisfied eyes. Why does the cat on the table look so familiar? Gradually, Pescado's expression grew weirder and weirder. Finally, he asked Lung, "Young master, could this cat be?" Lung waved his hand and introduced them to everyone. "Come, let me make a grand introduction. This is my brother Sillen, this is Wheeze, and this is Chetto." The rest of the people rolled their eyes. What kind of introduction is this? All he said was his name and nothing else? Everyone was familiar with the name Sillen. After all, they had followed Lung for a long time, and they knew a lot of things about him. However, the name Chetto was a lot more unfamiliar to them. As for Pescado, he was certain that the Sillen in front of him was the same person he used to know. Pescado knew very well what Sillen was capable of, so he didn't think that Sillen would be a burden to them. However, it was a different story for the others, especially the two people playing the game and Ingweji. They were very dissatisfied with Lung's words. What did he mean by, 10 people can't even compare to a man and a cat? Was the young master trying to boost the others' morale and diminish his own? Pescado and the other two had the same thought after they learned of Lung's words. Although Pescado himself was the weakest among the 10 people, he didn't think that he would lose to the guy who was reading the newspaper on a chair. "Why don't we get to know each other better? It'll be a lot smoother if we get to know each other better," the person next to Pescado suggested. The rest of the people also agreed with his suggestion. Lung looked at Sillen and asked for Sillen's opinion. "Then let them talk amongst themselves. Lung, find a place." "I have something to tell you," Sillen said. "Sure." Lung pointed at a room and motioned for them to go there. After they entered the room, Lung said to the people outside, "Don't make too much noise." "Understood, young master." The people were already warming up and getting ready to communicate with each other. After closing the door, Lung didn't care how the people in front of him were going to communicate with each other. Normally, these people thought too highly of themselves and thought that they were superior to everyone else. It wasn't a bad idea to give them a blow. "What's the matter? Why are you acting so mysterious? Don't tell me that the media operation a while ago involved you?" Lung pulled a chair over and sat down. He didn't like to stand. Wherever he went, he wouldn't sit if he could lie down, and he wouldn't stand if he could sit. "No. It's about Olillo's cage." As soon as he heard the words, Olillo's cage, Lung unconsciously straightened his back and his expression became much more serious. He hadn't told Sillen the reason why they were going to see paradise in detail, but he didn't expect Sillen to mention Olillo's cage first. Sillen took out a star atlas shard. This shard made Lung jump out of his chair. God's tear. F***ck. It's really the God's tear. Lung carefully picked up the shard that Sillen took out and looked at Sillen. "Are you really going to give this to our Andryra family?" "Yes. This thing means a lot to you guys, but it won't be of much use to me," Sillen replied. Because of Lung, Sillen and the Andryra family were now allies. Although the Andryra family would give him some face because of Lung, they had to earn it themselves. Taking out this star atlas would not only help Lung and the Andryra family behind him, but it would also make the old fox behind the Andryra family pay more attention to the 11th Squadron. Lung rearranged his surroundings. After making sure he wouldn't attract any attention, he took out a shard of his own. This shard had been in the hands of the Andryra family for a long time, but they hadn't been able to find the other shards. If it weren't for the fact that the situation in the League of Stars was getting stranger and stranger, Lung wouldn't have decided to use this incomplete shard to find the God's Tear. Before this, they had only speculated that the God's Tear might be in Sea Paradise. Lung had brought this incomplete shard to Sea Paradise just to give it a try. To be honest, everyone in the Andryra family knew about this, including the old fox Andryra Phocas, didn't think that Lung would be able to find the God's Tear this time. Therefore, when Phocas found out that Lung was going to Sea Paradise, he gave Lung a time limit of 100 days. Once the 100 days were up, Lung had to go back immediately. He wasn't allowed to stay in a dangerous place like Sea Paradise anymore. Phocas didn't just send Lung to help protect him, but also to supervise him. If Lung didn't want to pack up and go home when the time was up, Phocas would use force to drag him back. I didn't expect this, I didn't expect this. There were only 2 shards of the god's tear. Many of the core members of the Andryra family knew about this. However, because there were only 2, it was extremely difficult to find the other one. Therefore, Lung would never have thought that he would be able to see the other shard that the entire Andryra family had been looking forward to for so many years. Lung didn't ask Silin about the origin of this shard. This was a taboo. Those who had Olilo's shard would never speak about it, and they didn't want others to find it. Therefore, as long as Silin didn't say anything, Lung wouldn't ask. He was already satisfied to be able to obtain another shard. Lung's eyes lit up. He put the 2 shards together. Because he was too excited, his hands were trembling. After the shards combined, a complete image of the star map flashed. The appearance of the god's tear wasn't as complicated as the shortcut. After the complete image of the star map was formed, the bright spot that marked the location of the god's tear was very clear. Moreover, there was no need to search for the star map. Silin Helong knew where it represented. Sea Paradise, it really is Sea Paradise. There was an image of a key above the bright spot on the star map. It was like the needle of a compass, and it could tell the exact location of the god's tear. This meant that Lung's operation this time was no longer a probing operation. With the directions on the star map, they would be able to find the detailed location when they arrived at Sea Paradise. Ha 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 ha! Lung was so excited that he slapped the armrest of his chair. I originally planned to spend 100 days to find it. Now, it seems that it won't take that long. If everything goes well, it will only take a few days. Ha ha ha! The old man probably didn't think that I would be able to obtain a complete star map. Lung patted Silin's shoulder hard. Good brother, I told you that it would be beneficial to bring you along. I really am a genius. Ha ha, genius. Silin. He really couldn't understand why Lung was praising him for being a genius. Lung looked exceptionally happy after obtaining the complete star map and directions. He was even jumping up and down with every step he took. When he opened the door and saw the people in the living room with different expressions, he didn't care what the result was. He wouldn't be angry even if all of them lost miserably. Silin looked at the scene inside the living room. Hui Mao was still crouching and eating a fish biscuit, and Cheto was still reading the newspaper. Some of the others were playing games, and some were sitting quietly. Ingweiji put the tidied-up box to the side and started cleaning his gun again. His expression was as serious as ever. However, 2 of them were rubbing their hands behind their back. Pescado's face was twitching slightly as he walked like he was enduring some kind of pain. All right. Pack up and prepare to depart immediately, Lung said. Pescado and the others felt very awkward when they saw their young master's uncontrollable laughter. He wasn't mocking them, was he? Probably not. Young master, didn't we say that we're going to rest for 2 more days and wait for good weather? One of them said. Lung waved his hand and said, We're not waiting anymore. We're leaving now. Come back as soon as possible. Lung didn't tell the others about Olilo's star map, nor did he report it to his grandfather Phocas. It was fine if he didn't obtain the complete star map, but he couldn't report it to the Andryra family immediately after he obtained it. He was afraid of leaking it. The tear of God might not be as attractive as the other Olilos to most humans, but this was Sector H. In Sector H, there were plenty of people who desired the tear of God. Therefore, after some thought, Lung decided to find it himself first before anything else. All right, I'll let Defan know, the man replied. Defan was one of the 10 people Lung had brought with him this time. Defan wasn't his real name, it was his nickname. Many people in the Andryra family had forgotten what Defan's real name was. Everyone just called him Defan. Defan and the others stayed on the spaceplane and didn't follow Lung here. Silin shook his arm as he watched the person leave. He was probably the person who fought Cheto just now, and he didn't gain the upper hand. Maybe they didn't gain the upper hand in the exchange just now, But that didn't mean they were weak. Their true potential wasn't here. Once they were at the sea, their attack power would multiply several times. Moreover, most of them were tamers. A good trainer alone can control hundreds of marine fishes or other higher marine creatures for his own use. Maybe these people hadn't reached that level yet, but they were definitely not far off. Scylla was also looking forward to seeing what would happen when the legendary tamers who had received the sea god's inheritance worked together. Would they be able to control marine creatures, or would the overlords of the sea suppress them? As for the tear of God, what kind of effect would that so-called specialized organ have? Thanks to Lung's urging, Pescado and the others quickly made preparations to depart. The Andryra family wasn't short of money, so the spaceplane they used this time didn't look flashy at all. However, it was only after they entered the spaceplane that they realized how luxurious it was. Moreover, there was another world inside this large spaceplane. It was all prepared for this trip to see paradise. Huimao didn't eat any more fish biscuits after boarding the spaceplane. Instead, he found a comfortable spot and curled himself into a ball to sleep. The others thought that it was just a reaction after it was full, but Scylla knew very well that the amount of fish biscuits they ate earlier wasn't enough to satisfy Huimao's appetite at all. As for Huimao's current behavior, it was actually because he wanted to save up energy so that he could forage for food at Sea Paradise. In terms of understanding towards Sea Paradise, the academicians from the League of Stars Research Institute might not necessarily be as knowledgeable as some of the people from Sector H, especially a family like Andryra's. The information Long was showing Scylla right now was enough to prove that the Andryra family's understanding of Sea Paradise surpassed the academicians. The information Scylla was reading right now was about some of the creatures living in Sea Paradise. Right now, the screen was displaying a species of fish that was relatively common in the upper layers of Sea Paradise. In Scylla's opinion, these fish could no longer be called simple fishes. Although they weren't big individually, and an adult was less than a meter in size, these fellows had a mouth full of sharp teeth. Their male pectoral and pelvic fins were covered in dense spikes, and when they propped up their dorsal fins and spread their pectoral and pelvic fins, they looked like a crouching beast from the front. These fish always moved in groups. They had a leader and they hunted in groups. Every group had tens of thousands of members. The survival method of a group was not for defense, but to gather an absolute advantage in strength to attack and hunt. They were very organized, and they hunted in an orderly manner under the leadership of their leader. When the leader died, the group would quickly elect a new leader to take over the previous leader's position and lead the group to hunt. The competition between groups was also pretty intense. Their powerful domain awareness allowed them to kill their own kind that didn't belong to their group without mercy. They would tear the intruders into pieces and eat them. These fish had a habit when they started hunting. The first bite had to be bloody, and it couldn't be missed. It was like a good start to a battle. The bleeding would make the other members of the group even more excited, making the hunt even more frenzied. They would keep chasing until the prey was completely eliminated. On the contrary, if the first attack missed and there was no blood, the other members of the group would feel discouraged. Because of this, when such a group launched an attack, the fish that rushed to the front with the mission of taking the first blood would either be the leader of the group, or the few leader candidates other than the leader. In short, they would definitely be the strongest few in the group. Therefore, generally speaking, if one couldn't escape from such a group of fish, they had to avoid the first blood attack. After avoiding the first blood attack, it would be easier to escape later on. The fish that couldn't take the first blood would automatically give up after chasing for a while. There were several other fish that were similar to this fish, and these fish were just the weaker groups in Sea Paradise. They were just the common ones on the surface of the water. If they continued to go deeper into the sea, there would be more and more powerful sea beasts. Scylla didn't know if there would be sea beasts like the blueskin here, but from the current information, those giant deep-sea beasts were not any weaker than the blueskin. Sea Paradise was a paradise for sea beasts, but it was a nightmare for humans. The atmospheric gas composition was not something that ordinary people could withstand. From time to time, there would be storms and other bad weather. The abnormal magnetic field and the environment that was not conducive to human survival always made people flinch. Because they understood the environment of sea paradise, the Andryra family also developed some instruments and tools that were not sold to the public. These could allow them to resist the abnormal magnetic field of the planet and enter the planet. After sailing for a while, they were close to their destination. "We're about to arrive. There are 5 minutes left. Get ready," Lung said. Huimao, who was sleeping in the corner, pricked up its ears. It opened its eyes and bent its claws to wipe its face. It rubbed its back on the ground, got up, and shook its fur. It was so energetic. Chapter 362. From space, Sea Paradise looked like a huge deep blue sphere. The blue color looked a little eerie, and it felt as if a pair of deep eyes were staring at them and trying to awaken the fear in their hearts. Just like what Mo Hung had told Silen, Sea Paradise did have a very strange magnetic field. Silen and the others could sense it when they were approaching the planet, and some of the instruments inside the spaceplane were flashing and popping up. Under such circumstances, the Andryra family's technology finally came into effect. There were 2 sets of equipment on the spaceplane. One was for normal use, and it was about the same as the basic equipment on other starships and spaceplanes. The other was specially prepared for Sea Paradise. After switching the equipment one by one, the spaceplane returned to normal. "How is it? How do you feel?" Silen asked Cheto. As for Huimao, the way he was staring at the display screen was enough to tell that he was completely fine and in high spirits. "It's fine. Although the magnetic field affects most machines, it doesn't affect us much. It's because we are individuals who can control ourselves and those machines can't. However, the second set of instruments the Andryra family has is very special. The machine language they speak is different from normal machines, and I can learn a lot from them," Cheto replied. "That's good." Since Cheto wasn't affected by the planet's unusual magnetic field, Silen was relieved. Cheto was a great help, and Silen would have to spend a lot of effort without him. "Wheeze, don't act on your own when we enter the planet," Silen instructed. "Amen, amen." Wheeze didn't even look back as it crouched next to the giant display screen and watched the blue planet grow closer and closer. Its tail curled into an arc and swung back and forth. It was obvious that it was thinking of something again. Silen pinched one of Huimao's ears and asked, "Did you really hear that?" "Yes, I did," Huimao promised. "Silen, get ready. We're about to enter the planet," Faramir called out. The blue light was getting closer and closer. The spaceplane was a little bumpy as it entered the atmosphere. The effect of the abnormal magnetic field was the strongest at this time, so it was normal for a spaceplane to be in such a situation. That was why Lung had told everyone to be prepared. Otherwise, if they were not careful, they would be tossed to God knows where. The monitor in the control room showed the analysis of the outside environment by the instrument. The air composition was indeed not something that ordinary people could withstand. Even people with good physical fitness and A-rank genes might not be able to survive for more than half a day without the help of breathing equipment. As the entire planet was covered by the ocean, the humidity in the air was very high. Some of the ocean's surface would form a thin layer of clouds and fog. Aside from these thin layers of clouds and fog, Ocean Paradise's blue color was even deeper. Looking down from above, it looked like a boundless deep blue abyss. The equipment had already been distributed, and now everyone was organizing and changing their equipment. Silen put on protective clothing and a breathing mask. The protective clothing was a product of the Andryra family's own invention. It was suitable for underwater activities, and its resistance to pressure was excellent. The protective clothing looked like a normal diving suit when it wasn't fully unfurled, but once it was unfurled in the ocean, one would realize that it was different from a normal diving suit. Cheto, don't you need to wear these?" Pescado and the others who were putting on the protective gear stared at the motionless Cheto in puzzlement. Even if they had to take off the protective gear and enter the adaptation period after landing, they couldn't just not put it on right now. No one could guarantee that they would be able to land safely later, and if things didn't go smoothly, they wouldn't have the time to adapt once they rushed out. "I don't need it," Cheto replied. Pescado and the others wore strange looks on their faces. "Are you not a normal human, but someone who lives in the water?" Cheto shook his head, but he didn't explain in detail. One of them shot Cheto a glance before pointing at Huimao, who was stretching his fat body. "Aren't you guys wearing some kind of protective gear? The atmosphere outside isn't like that of a habitable planet." Huimao flicked his ears. "No need, I'm not like you guys." Why did these words sound like they were filled with a strong sense of contempt? Pescado and the others, who were not convinced, loosened their breathing masks and said, "Actually, we don't have to wear these. We can also throw away our breathing masks when we really enter the water. Why don't we have a competition then?" "Alright, there's no time for you to move around when the time comes." Lung patted his friends after putting on the protective gear. If they hadn't obtained the star map before, Lung might have allowed them to move around freely. But now that they knew the location of the Tear of God, they had to put all their energy into searching for it. Pescado and the others calmed down a lot after Lung's declaration. However, they were puzzled by something. Something was wrong with Lung. He looked a lot more serious than they had imagined. Could he be nervous? "Have you finished scanning the map yet?" Lung asked. The Andryra family had several global maps of Ocean Paradise, but due to the uniqueness of the place, they would always get a different map every time they sent a team to Ocean Paradise. Lung had a map from 10 years ago that showed 3 relatively large coral reefs, but all of them had sunk a lot due to the movement of the Earth's crust. Therefore, they had to scan the map again every time they came here. Although the second set of equipment could withstand the abnormal magnetic field, it was accompanied by a much slower calculation speed. It took almost 20 minutes to scan and draw the map. If it were in a normal environment, it would have taken less than a minute to get a fairly accurate map. "Young master, there's a atoll near the coordinates you've given us. It's not big, about a kilometer in diameter, and there's a warm current passing through it. The salinity of the seawater is high, and I'm afraid that a few species of fish and sea beasts will appear there on a large scale." Lung pondered over his next plan while listening to his subordinate's report. The old man's previous plan definitely couldn't be used, and the coordinates that Lung had given them were not the ones they had planned beforehand. Therefore, it would be a problem for them to land and rest there. There was only one atoll in the sea around the place that the star map was pointing at. Perhaps this atoll was already very big in the eyes of many people, but for Lung and the others, this atoll was still too small. This was because they had to take into account the sea beasts that lived on the atoll and the surrounding fishes. Just like many large animals on land, the coral reefs were also filled with the territories of all kinds of sea beasts. Those ferocious fellows were not willing to give up even the slightest bit of their territory. Moreover, there were no real land plates other than the coral reefs in Ocean Paradise. Therefore, every coral reef was a battlefield, and battles for territory were happening at every moment. Looking at the analysis map of that atoll, Lung said, "The spaceplane definitely can't land." The image displayed on the scanner made Lung think of many things. People like them only needed a glance to determine the approximate distribution of the population on the coral reefs, as well as the approximate territory of the sea beasts in each area. Moreover, the sea beasts of Ocean Paradise were different from the sea beasts of other planets. These sea beasts were very difficult to tame, and the tamers needed a period of adaptation before they could gradually display their usefulness. Therefore, it was not a good idea to use the advantages of a tamer to deal with these sea beasts. Currently, there were places on the atoll that were filled with small groups of sea beasts lying on their stomachs, basking in the sun, while there were other places that looked empty, but not a single small sea beast dared to set foot there. That was because those places were the territory of some big guy, and anyone who went there would be courting death. In order to clear out a place to rest, it would be better to start with the small groups of sea beasts. Lung was just about to order his subordinates to use their weapons to clear out a place when Hui Mao jumped onto Silin's shoulder and looked at Lung. "I'll go. I'll clean up those little bugs." Little bugs? A few of Lung's subordinates had strange expressions on their faces. Those so-called little bugs, even if they were young sea beasts, were more than half a meter long. Moreover, they all had hard outer armor, sharp claws, and razor-sharp teeth. They were definitely not gentle beasts. Moreover, compared to the fat cat in front of them, those little bugs could practically be elevated to the level of giant beasts. Perhaps Pescado was a little afraid of Hui Mao because of what happened in the past, but none of them had really seen Hui Mao's great abilities before. When they were communicating earlier, Hui Mao did not make a move either. Therefore, some people wanted to laugh at Hui Mao's words. "Hey, little fat cat," although the little bugs over there look so small, that person used his thumb and forefinger to make a sesame seed-size gesture, then used his 2 arms to make a meter-long gesture. In reality, they are at least this big. Hui Mao looked at the person who spoke with disdain and said to Silin, "Uncultured people are so pitiful." That person still wanted to argue, but was stopped by Lung. "Silin, what do you think?" Lung asked. Silin twisted the hair on the back of the fat cat's neck in front of him. "Are you confident?" "Absolutely." "Can you control the situation?" "Absolutely." Silin looked at Hui Mao suspiciously, and only let go when Hui Mao raised his paw and swore. It was not that Silin did not believe in Hui Mao's ability, but he understood Hui Mao's ability too well, and this guy's habit of getting carried away when he was excited. There were a lot of sea beasts on the atoll, now they just needed to clear a place for them to rest. If they made too much of a commotion, it would definitely cause a chain reaction, and sea beasts from other places might come over to join in the fun. That was not what Silin wanted to see. After all, there were only a few people here, and not a large hunting team. Lung also told Hui Mao about the action plan and the reward for Hui Mao if they successfully cleared the area, which made Hui Mao value this task a lot more. "Wheeze, I'll leave it to you to clear the area. Don't worry, remember what you said about the reward." Hui Mao clenched his paw and was eager to try. "Then should I lower the aircraft a little?" someone asked. "No need." As soon as Silin opened the cabin door, Hui Mao shot out like an arrow from a bow, and the others saw through the image displayed on the screen that Hui Mao that shot out spread its wings in the air and flew towards the atoll with a loud flap. "Damn! Are those wings? Are those wings? That cat actually has wings." Pescado and the others looked at the image displayed on the screen as if it was a miracle. Serene was also looking at the screen. However, he was prepared at all times. If the cat got carried away by its success later, he would have to remind it. There was a place on the atoll where some small sea beasts were lying densely, and not far away, there were some plants that were 20 to 30 meters tall, and it looked like a small jungle. This small jungle was the boundary between the 2 territories. Hui Mao's task was to clear the small jungle near the group of small sea beasts, as well as part of the coral reef area around it. The small sea beasts that were lying on the coral reef and basking in the sun were huddled together, some of them were fighting, and some of them were squinting their eyes and straightening their backs to absorb the sunlight, looking very comfortable. Their sharp claws moved from time to time, and they left thin marks on the coral reef below. The coral reef in Ocean Paradise was a few times harder than normal coral reefs, so if it was a normal coral reef, these sea beasts would probably be as easy as scratching carrots. The sea beast lying at the highest point suddenly opened its eyes and looked at the sky above. There was a shadow getting closer and closer, and it could also feel that the other party was looking at it with an unfriendly gaze. This feeling made it very uncomfortable, so it moved its back to its fullest, making it look twice as big as it was before. This sea beast let out a low, warning growl from its throat, causing the surrounding sea beasts to raise their heads one after another. After seeing the person in the sky, they also let out a series of warning sounds. Even if it was a weakling that they thought was beneath them, they would still let out an absolute warning sound. Therefore, before Huimao flew there, the sea beasts in that area all let out a low warning sound. Along with these warning sounds, the big mouths full of sharp teeth that were still guarding the door opened, and they were waiting for the next food. Huimao's eyes became brighter and brighter, and it sped up. When it was nearly 10 meters away from the coral reef, Huimao retracted its wings and plunged into the group of sea beasts. Then, a huge mouth that looked like that of a cat appeared in the group of sea beasts, and it was only a huge mouth that could be seen. This huge mouth swallowed the sea beasts one after another, and the first one to be swallowed was the one that was originally lying at the highest point. Before it could even wave its claws, it was swallowed by Huimao's huge mouth, and it didn't even have time to squeak. In the aircraft in the air, in front of the display screen, Pescado and the others were shocked at first, but then they fell silent. They suddenly realized that this cat was not as harmless as it looked. Moreover, this cat's appetite was really huge. In less than half a minute, with Huimao's landing point as the center, all the sea beasts within a radius of 10 meters were swallowed, and not a single one was left. As for the rest of the small sea beasts, they had already fled when they saw that the situation was not good. Huimao symbolically chased a few steps, and drove away the remaining sea beasts that were still lingering around, unwilling to leave. So, Pescado and the others saw this scene again. A chubby little Huimao chased a group of sea beasts that were much larger than it, and they hurriedly jumped into the sea to escape. After clearing a satisfactory area, Huimao jumped to the highest point, and told Silin and the others that they could land. After that, it tilted its head and scratched its ears with its hind legs, yawned, and lay there lazily, licking its paws and wiping its face. The people in the aircraft, including Ingweji, who had always been serious, looked at Silin with very envious eyes. After all, it was really a very happy thing to have such a pet. Look, it took a lot of effort for them to do this, but a cat was able to do it. When dealing with sea beasts, people would at most hunt them down, but Huimao just swallowed them directly, and from the very beginning, it had established itself as a high-ranking predator in the food chain. The beast race had their own way of solving problems, so everything that Huimao did was surprisingly effective, and the effect was much better than when Lung and the others used force. "Let's go, we can go down now," Silin said to the others. A slightly smaller aircraft flew out from the original aircraft. This smaller aircraft was the flying tool that Silin and the others used to fly on the surface of the sea, and it was also a navigation tool in the sea. This aircraft could dive deep into the sea. People had heard of the flying vehicle, but not many people knew about the tri-amphibious aircraft. The tri-amphibious aircraft were extremely expensive to build. They could dive deep into the sea as a submarine, travel between star zones as a normal aircraft, and even run on land as a small mobile base. The cost of the one that Lung and the others were piloting right now was even higher. A tri-amphibious aircraft that could resist the abnormal magnetic field was extremely rare. This tri-amphibious aircraft landed in the coral reef area that Huimao had cleared out. There was still a group of sea beasts wandering around in the area, paying attention to the movements of Silin and the others. Their two front claws moved forward a little, but they pulled back in the next moment. Huimao bared his teeth in that direction, and the sea beasts hurriedly jumped into the sea and ran away. "Let's rest here for a bit, and let our bodies adapt to the environment here," Lung said. After using the apparatus to measure the surrounding environment, Lung took off his mask and the protective suit he was wearing. He slowly stretched his body and moved his limbs. Silin had always known that Lung wasn't a normal human, but he didn't expect him to be able to endure in this kind of atmospheric environment. This is the advantage of people like us. We have a sense of familiarity with the environment of the sea. Although it's a little difficult here, we'll get used to it after a while, Lung said. After Lung, the rest of the group also took off their masks one after another. However, 2 of them put them on every once in a while. Their ability to adapt to this kind of atmospheric environment wasn't as good as the others. Silen also gave it a try. It was true that he wasn't used to this kind of atmospheric environment, but it was fine. He endured it a little longer than the average person, and it would definitely take him a lot more time to adapt to it completely than Lung and the others. Huimao couldn't stay idle after a while. It jumped left and right, and even searched for some sea beast eggs on the coral reefs for a change of pace. Silen allowed it to do whatever it wanted as long as it didn't provoke other sea beasts on its own. Cheto was collecting some data and recording the unusual scenery around them. Silen took off his protective suit and felt the different air pressure in the air. Then, he started moving his limbs just like Lung and the others. This was the advantage of his constitution. A normal person's blood vessels would have burst already. Silen was stretching his legs when he heard a cat's meow from the forest. "Oh my meow, there's a treasure!" Chapter 363. Silen followed the sound and saw Huimao squatting in front of a plant, his claws digging into the reef next to the plant. Rumble, a small round ball rolled out as Huimao retracted his claws. It was the size of a pigeon egg and was a bright blue. "Silen, I think this thing is worth a lot." Huimao bent his claws and fiddled with the crystal-like ball. Silen picked up the ball and looked at it. It was cool to the touch, but not too cold. It had a faint plant fragrance, and it was very refreshing. "Oh, I didn't think there would be something like this here." Lung walked over. "People call it the guardian heart." "Guardian heart?" Huimao listened carefully. Lung's explanation made him feel that this crystal-like ball was really worth a lot of money. "Yes, this is something that can only be found in some special areas of the sea. The quality of the guardian heart produced in sea heaven is the best, and the effect is also the best." Lung explained the origin and use of the guardian heart to Silen and Huimao. This crystal-like ball was actually synthesized from the roots of some plants on the coral reef. Its purpose was to repel sea beasts and other beasts and insects that ate the plant. After the synthesis of the roots, the ball would slowly move towards the surface, but it would not come out. There would be many of these crystals around the plant near the surface. They would form a circle to protect the plant and repel some small sea beasts. As for the large sea beasts, even if they couldn't be repelled, they could make them lose their appetite for the plant and not bite it. The smell of the guardian heart is very comfortable to humans, but it's like something disgusting to the sea beasts. So when you see a plant on a coral reef full of sea beasts without any small sea beasts around it, it means that the plant's roots have synthesized the guardian heart. Strangely, many researchers have tried to synthesize the medicine from these crystals, but the results were not ideal. So the natural crystal's price in the market has always been very high. The guardian heart from sea heaven has always been the most expensive of these crystals. If it was this one, it would probably fetch a price of 6 to 7 digit. We can dig more of these things, but if they aren't fully formed and haven't been moved to the surface, we don't need to dig them. Leave them for the plants to chase away sea beasts. Lung's last sentence was directed at Huimao. Looking at Huimao's eyes that were growing brighter and brighter, especially when he heard the words, "very valuable," those cat eyes were especially bright. While they were talking, Cheto walked over from the other side of the room. There are a lot of hallucinogenic substances in the seawater. The indigenous creatures can develop resistance to them, but outsiders can't. Cheto showed some analysis data to Silen and mentioned the distribution of the sea beasts living on the coral reef. The sea beasts and some of the fish in the sea can't be eaten directly, Lung said. Suddenly, he recalled that Huimao ate a big meal when he was cleaning up this area. Lung turned to look at Huimao, who was digging excitedly for crystals next to other plants. He looked at Silen and asked, "Is it really okay for that cat to eat anything?" "It's fine. It can still consume these things, so don't worry about it." Silen was already used to it. Back in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, Huimao ate a lot of sea beasts. Although the sea beasts here were a little special, they weren't enough to give Huimao a stomachache. Young master, the scanners have found something, someone said from the other side. After landing on the atoll, Lung's subordinates quickly put their scanners into the seawater to investigate the situation around them. Lung especially asked his subordinates to put a couple more scanners in the direction the star map was pointing at. "What's going on?" Lung asked. Silen and Cheto also walked over, leaving behind the gray cat who was still digging for treasures around a couple of plants in the small forest. The scanners have descended to 3,000 meters below the water surface. This is the result. The man passed the electronic board to Lung. There was a wavy line on the electronic board. Due to the uniqueness of the environment here and the strangeness of the planet, the scanners didn't have any detailed data. All they could do was display some images and areas with abnormal energy waves and draw them into a 3D map. Every depth corresponded to a point on the 3D map, and the scanners detected an anomaly at the 3,000-meter mark. From that point on, the color of the 3D map began to change. As the scanners continued to descend, the color on the 3D map deepened. Lung looked very excited when he saw the result on the 3D map. He knew that the tier of gods had to be at that place because the energy reflection there was different from the rest of the sea. Up until now, this was the only place where the scanners had detected an anomaly. The scanners in the other parts of the sea didn't show anything like this. Why are there stairs forming here? Is this a normal phenomenon? Silen pointed at a place on the 3D map and asked. There was a steep slope below the coral reef, and from the 3D map drawn by the scanners, it was clear that there was a staircase at the top of the slope. One end of the staircase extended all the way down to the seabed. A staircase like this isn't meant for humans. Could it be a sea beast? Lung said. No one knew if it was man-made or natural, but they had to admit that the staircase gave them a very strange feeling. Keep paying attention to the scanners in this area and prepare yourselves. We're going to move after the scanners are done, Lung instructed the others. Yua. Suddenly, a long howl came from the small forest where Huimao was. Serene and the others turned their heads to look. Between the trees, there was a tail with dark stripes swaying. The plants that were 20 to 30 meters tall couldn't hide this tail at all. The branches and leaves of those plants were snapped by the huge tail and scattered in all directions. Some of the smaller sea beasts nearby were frightened by the howl and fled in all directions. Pooh! Blue blood sprayed out and splashed on the large leaves of the plants, making a rustling sound. The twitching of the big tail and the movement of the leaves gradually subsided. Not long after, a rustling sound came from afar. The leaves of the small forest swayed, and soon, the head of a large sea beast appeared. To Lung and the others' astonishment, Whis bit down on a long tentacle around the sea beast's mouth and dragged it over to them. At first glance, the size of the sea beast was really exciting. In comparison, the difference in size between the sea beast that was cleaned up earlier was much smaller. The sea beast that Huimao dragged over looked like an eel. Its body was almost 5 meters in diameter. There were many pairs of legs on its torso. Compared to the smaller sea beasts that Huimao cleaned up before, this sea beast was probably at a higher level of the food chain. As Huimao dragged it, the sea beast gradually revealed its full appearance, and there was a long wound on its abdomen. Blue blood was flowing out, and because of Huimao's dragging, it formed a blue trail behind it. After Huimao dragged the sea beast in front of Silen, he asked Silen and the others, "Do you want to eat it?" Pescado and the others shook their heads. Looking at the sea beast that had died with its mouth wide open, revealing its sharp teeth, Pescado and the others didn't have any appetite at all. Just the blue trail and some of the internal organs on it made Pescado feel a little nauseous. Something's wrong, that sea beast isn't strictly an amphibious sea beast. Although it can crawl on the coral reefs for a while, it doesn't stay there for long. It will only rush to the coral reefs when it's hunting, but it's obviously not hunting now. Besides, all the small sea beasts in this area have been chased away by Wheeze, so what's this big guy doing here? Lung said while rubbing his chin. The gray cat licked the blue blood on its paw and hurriedly clarified itself. It came out of the sea. At first I didn't want to deal with it because I was busy digging for treasures, but who would have thought that it would charge straight at me? There are still a lot of gems I dug out over there, and I can't let it eat them. I really didn't want to cause trouble, this guy just bumped into me. Ingweji looked at the sea and said, "There's a school of sawtooth fish." Sawtooth fish were recorded in the information collected by the Andryra family, and it was quite detailed. This was a typical species. Sawtooth fish lived in the middle and upper layers of the sea, and they moved in groups. Moreover, every school of fish was very large, and tens of thousands of sawtooth fish were enough to make some of the larger sea beasts in the middle and upper layers flinch. Adult sawtooth fish could reach up to 5 meters long, and their upper and lower jaws could open up to 270 degrees, and their powerful bite force could directly crush the bones of the small sea beast. Therefore, when the Andryra family came over, they would generally stay far away from this school of fish. This was not a school of fish that could escape even if it was the first drop of blood. Those sawtooth fish are hunting in a circle. That big guy just wanted to hide on the coral reefs, that's all. Ingweji continued, "In about 5 minutes, the vanguard of the sawtooth fish will pass this area of the atoll." Lung sighed. "In other words, even if we want to make a move, we have to wait for this group of troublesome guys to leave first." Ingweji nodded seriously and said, "Theoretically, yes." Silen had to admit that in the marine environment, his perception was indeed not as sensitive as someone like Ingweji. The reason why Ingweji could say these words with such certainty was also because of the sea beasts and sea fishes in the sea. Ingweji was indeed one of the top 10 bodyguards of the old fox Andryrophokos, to be able to adapt to the new environment and start taming sea beasts in such a short time. Go into the aircraft, there will be a lot of sea beasts coming up to the coral reefs later, let's avoid this wave first. Lung called out to Silen to take refuge in the aircraft. Huimao handed the guardian heart to Silen for safekeeping, and prepared to stay outside to watch the show. Anyway, if the coral reefs were too crowded, it would fly into the sky. After Silen entered the aircraft, some more sea beasts came up to the coral reefs one after another, but the feudal lords of those areas did not come out to drive them away, they only gave a warning, and then there was no movement. Unless the invaders caused too much trouble, those feudal lords would come out to fight. Other than that, they were all hiding in the caves, nervously watching everything outside. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Some fish flew out of the water with their wings outstretched. They flew from the outside of the atoll all the way to the lagoon inside the atoll. In addition to these flying fish, several small sea beasts also crawled from the outside of the atoll into the lagoon inside the atoll. The originally quiet lagoon suddenly became noisy. The enclosed lagoon provided protection for these little guys, because those sawtooth fish could not land on the coral reefs, nor could they jump or fly. With the barrier of the atoll in between, those flying fish could be considered to have escaped the hunting of the sawtooth fish. However, although these flying fish avoided the sawtooth fish, they still had to face other predators, such as Huimao, who spread its wings and flew in the air. Huimao spread its wings and hovered there, waiting for those flying fish to come to its door. It only needed to open its mouth and wait. If it did not want to eat anymore, it would deliberately stretch out its fat cat claws to hit those flying fish back to where they came from, or directly slap those flying over to where the other sea beasts were on the coral reef. How could it not eat those that came to its door? Therefore, the sea beasts that were originally lying on the coral reefs to take refuge opened their mouths wide when they were slapped by the flying fish in front of them. Pescado and the others who were hiding in the aircraft saw this scene, and all had the same thought at the same time. This cat is really despicable. Those flying fish would probably be depressed about how they encountered this malefic existence. There were more and more sea beasts on the coral reefs, and the sawtooth fish also revealed their shadows. On the surface of the sea, elongated triangular dorsal fins emerged from the water, and some poor guys who did not have time to jump on the coral reefs or couldn't get on the coral reefs at all were directly torn apart and swallowed by the sawtooth fish. In addition to the sawtooth fish that were hunting for food, there were also many half-bitten or incomplete bodies that were thrown out of the water because of the sawtooth fish's biting. The originally blue seawater became even bluer. Celine thought of that sentence again. The blue of the seawater is dyed by the blood of sea beasts. 5 minutes later, as far as the eye could see, the sea was full of those floating triangular dorsal fins, and this was only the vanguard of this school of fish. There were other members of the school behind them, and the water below the surface was also full of these ferocious guys. Thud! Huimao, who was swatting the flying fish, jumped back into the water. "What is that fat cat doing now?" Pescado asked. "It probably got bored playing in the sky and went underwater to watch the show." A pause later, Celine said, "Turn on a monitor." After Lung turned on one of the closed monitors inside the aircraft, Celine motioned for Cheto to connect the monitor to Huimao's data. It didn't take long for the underwater scene to appear on the monitor. This was also what Huimao saw, and it transmitted the scene back to the aircraft. The water below the atoll was a terrible battle for food. The sawtooth fish were forcing other fish and sea beasts towards the atoll. After all, there were only a few species that could climb onto the coral reefs or fly over them like the flying fish. Most of the prey were blocked by the wall of the atoll, and they had no way out because the sawtooth fish were already closing in on them. There were minced meat and scales everywhere, and the iconic big mouths and teeth of the sawtooth fish were everywhere. The color of the seawater was obviously much darker than before, and it sent chills down everyone's spine. The people inside the aircraft were staring at the terrible scene on the monitor when the result from the detector attracted everyone's attention. "The detector has reached the seabed," someone said excitedly. From the results sent back by the detector, everyone could see a strange scene in the 3D image. It looked like a city at the bottom of the sea. Although it was just a rough outline, Lung was still very excited to see it. "That's right, the tear of God must be there. Is the video not turned on? Why isn't there any video?" Lung asked. "Young Master, we've lost contact with the 3 detectors that reached the seabed." "Young Master, we've also lost contact with the 4th detector." "Young Master, we've also lost contact with the 5th detector." After the 5 probes sent to the coordinates reached the seabed, they lost contact with the aircraft before they could even capture a video image. Celine recalled the things Moon had mentioned when he was talking about the Tear of God. When the Shi family was researching the Tear of God, they once lived at the bottom of the sea for a period of time in order to better understand the sea monsters. You had used the word lived, not stayed or anything else. Connecting the dots to the blurry outline on the 3D map, Celine thought. Did the Shi family build an underwater city at the bottom of the sea? Although it was unbelievable, this was sea paradise and not any other ordinary sea. It was already difficult for an aircraft to fly here, let alone building a city at the bottom of the sea. But the Shi family was not a family that could be judged by common sense. Perhaps it was really possible. How long until the sawtooth fish leave? Lung looked at Ingweji. Theoretically, it will take at least an hour. But if you're in a hurry, we can try to tame those sawtooth fish and let them leave earlier. Lung thought for a moment before waving his hands. Forget it. There are too many of them, and it'll take a lot of energy to go underwater. Let's save our energy for now. We're already here, so what's the harm in waiting for an hour? Celine stared at the thoughtful Cheto and asked, "Did you find anything?" "The 5 detectors lost contact with the planet's magnetic field," Cheto answered. Magnetic field? Aren't those instruments capable of resisting the planet's magnetic field? The Andryra family spent a lot of manpower and resources to build them. Lung frowned. Cheto shook his head. They can resist the planet's magnetic field, but the magnetic field is 2 to 3 times stronger at the target point. That's why the 5 instruments can't function normally. Is it their doing? Scylla asked. The them he was referring to were the she family members. Yes. Chapter 364. There were already a lot of sea beasts surrounding the aircraft. Fortunately, these sea beasts were focused on taking refuge, so they didn't show any hostility towards the aircraft. At most, they would scratch it with their claws out of curiosity. The hunting of the sawtooth fish lasted for an hour. When the surface of the sea gradually calmed down, these hunters didn't leave completely. The calmness of the sea did not mean that they had officially left. In the waters under the sea, there was still a large group of sawtooth fish that had stayed behind. Therefore, to see if the sawtooth fish had completely left, they just needed to look at the movements of the sea beasts that were taking refuge on the reef. Not all of these sea beasts were amphibians. Many of them could only stay on the reef for a short period of time. They would only risk leaving the water for a longer period of time when they were taking refuge. Therefore, compared to other sea beasts, these guys were the most anxious. Scylla and the others only needed to pay attention to the movements of these sea beasts. After another 10 minutes, some sea beasts began to slowly approach the water. After a few sea beasts tested the water, they suddenly plunged into the water and disappeared in a short while. Other sea beasts began to enter the water one after another. The originally crowded atoll began to become sparse, and the lords also began to expel the outsiders. Get ready to move. After the sea beasts left the atoll, Lung said, Scylla, call Wheeze back. We're going to the target. Huimao, who was called back by Scylla, was still a little unsatisfied. However, after flying out of the sea, it didn't immediately enter the aircraft. Instead, it found a few key spots in the previously cleared area and peed, then rubbed itself on the reef. Is this dividing territory? Pescado asked. It should be, but I'm not sure if the sea beasts will understand how cats divide territory, another person replied. Wheeze had tossed the dead sea beast into the sea and fed it to the sawtooth fishes. There were still some blue blood stains on the reef, but Wheeze didn't think that these blood stains would be enough to scare the little sea beasts away. Therefore, it left a scent here in its own way. If the sea beasts didn't know what was good for them, then it could just kill them right away. It was a very reasonable excuse. After marking the territory, Huimao entered the aircraft. Lung switched the aircraft to diving mode and entered the sea. After the aircraft entered the water, Scylla and the others officially saw the big stairs under the atoll. The stairs extended from the steep slope of the atoll all the way to the depths of the sea. The surface area of the sea still had some light shining in. Although the sea beasts in the middle area had darkened after being hunted by the sawtooth fish, they could still see various kinds of sea beasts swimming underwater. There aren't many large sea beasts in the surface area. Sometimes, the sea beasts in the middle area would come out for a walk in order to hunt. However, generally speaking, you won't encounter such large sea beasts here. The one that Wheeze killed was considered large in the surface area, but in the middle area was nothing. Wheeze would have been killed. Wheeze fish in the sea of the sea. Many of the things recorded in the information weren't complete. When they encountered an unfamiliar species, Lung would have his subordinates record the new species and analyze the basic information of this sea beast together. Scylla was also able to understand quite a bit of information from their discussions. There were a lot of information that didn't necessarily require all kinds of instruments to analyze. People like Lung and the others who were very familiar with the sea could infer a large amount of information from the sea beast's external appearance and body shape when they saw a sea beast. The advantages and disadvantages of every species' evolution were clearly displayed in the eyes of Lung and the others. Perhaps this group of sea beasts had mutated in a random direction in the special magnetic field of the sea paradise, but the natural directional selection would allow the outstanding mutants to survive. Every organ, every type of body shape, always had its own reason. The deeper they went, the darker the light in the sea. However, Lung didn't have anyone turn on the aircraft's lighting equipment, but instead used night vision equipment. Here, many sea beasts were sensitive to light, and the aircraft's illumination would excite those big guys. There are a lot of ferocious-looking big guys out there, but their tempers aren't as bad as they look. They don't have much curiosity towards foreign objects, and they're only interested in familiar prey. Lung told Sillin after the spaceplane swam past a 70-meter-long sea beast. Squatting on Sillin's shoulder, Huimao smacked his lips as he watched the guy leisurely wagging its tail away on the screen. Sure enough, one couldn't judge a sea beast by its appearance alone. Perhaps it was because this area had just been cleaned up by the school of sawtooth fish, but the aircraft didn't run into any trouble when it went down. There were relatively few sea beasts that appeared. The sea beasts in the middle area were indeed huge. The few sea beasts they saw were all about 100 meters long. Some looked like jellyfish, while others had all kinds of strange shapes and sizes. Sillin looked at the display on the screen. Right now, the aircraft was already more than 2,700 meters deep. Based on the results of the previous probes, they would find something soon. Beep, beep. As expected, the aircraft's probe equipment beeped. This is where the abnormal signal started, a subordinate said to Lung. Analyze it in depth. Lung turned on an instrument that the previous probes didn't have. The previous 5 probes hadn't been able to replicate this signal either. They had no choice but to analyze it after they got here. Very soon, the results were out. It's like a signal that tells anyone who comes here where to go, the person operating the analyzer said. The person operating the scanner said, "Young master, should we follow the direction of the signal?" Lung didn't say anything. He shot Sillin a glance before walking towards a restroom. Sillin tossed Huimao onto Cheto's shoulder and followed Lung into the room. Inside the room, Lung closed the door and took out the star map. The glowing key on the star map was pointing in a certain direction like a needle, but that direction wasn't where the signal was pointing. "What do you think?" Lung asked Sillin. "Just follow the star map and ignore the signal," Sillin said. Although he didn't know much about the Shi clan, from what little he knew, he felt that the signal was more like a misdirection to someone who didn't have a star chart. After staring at the star map for a while, Lung put it away. "Then let's follow the directions on the star map." Although Pescado and the others didn't understand why their young master didn't follow the direction of the signal and insisted on following the original destination, they still followed Lung's instructions. Ingweji shot a glance at Lung and Sillin before continuing with a serious expression. He knew that his young master definitely knew some crucial information, but he didn't expect that his young master wouldn't even tell him, an old man who was always by Fokos' side. Instead, he was discussing it with a team leader from the hunter group. "What kind of information is it?" Suddenly, Ingweji's eyelids twitched. "It can't be the tear of God." Right now, the temperature of the seawater was basically the same, and their surroundings were pitch black. At first, the spaceplane was able to observe their surroundings with the aid of night vision equipment. But when they were 7,000 meters below the surface, the magnetic field's interference grew stronger, and some basic equipment such as the night vision equipment started to go on strike. "We're approaching the seabed," Pescado said. Earlier, they had lost contact with the detectors when they were close to the seabed, and now they were experiencing the same thing. "Slow down by one more level. Be careful." "Yes, young master." The display screen displayed the same blurry outline of an underwater city as the previous detectors, but it was impossible to see it clearly because the night vision equipment had gone on strike. "They should be entering this underwater city by now, right?" Sillin didn't pay attention to the data or the other equipment on the spaceplane. Instead, he paid attention to Huimao's ears. This guy's ears were much more useful than the equipment Lung and the others were using. Lying on top of Cheto's body, Huimao's eyes were closed, its tail was wagging slowly, and its ears were twitching ever so slightly. Suddenly, Huimao's ears twitched once before it opened its eyes and patted Cheto with its paw. Then, it looked at Silin and said, "We're here." Lung and the others looked at Huimao and were about to ask him something when all the lights inside the spaceplane suddenly went out. Even the analysis equipment inside the spaceplane had stopped working. Lung took out the backup lights. They weren't electrical lights but natural fluorescent stones. Although they couldn't compare to the lighting system, they could still brighten up the spaceplane a little. "Young Master, the thrusters have stopped working, and all the equipment can't be activated. The spaceplane is falling right now," Pescado said. Bang! Bang! A moment later, the spaceplane came to a stop. "We've reached the seabed. What do we do, young master?" Lung looked at the equipment in his hand. The equipment the Andryra family had made for Sea Paradise was basically dead. They could only rely on themselves now. "Let's go out and take a look," Lung said. There was no point in staying inside the spaceplane. Since the spaceplane couldn't be activated, they would only be waiting for death. Maybe some undersea overlord would come over and step on them, and they wouldn't even know what it was that stepped on them. "Young Master, it's pitch black outside right now, and we can't just take out our lights. You know that there are a lot of big things at the bottom of the sea," a subordinate said. "We won't get out of here if we play it safe. We can only take risk. Let's go." While saying this, Lung walked to the buffer cabin and put on his protective suit. The others also checked their protective suits and equipment. After they were ready, Ingweji stood in front of Lung and shielded him. The cabin door opened and seawater poured in. Without the spaceplane's pressure balancing function, everyone could clearly feel the pressure even though they were wearing anti-pressure protective suit. The first communicator inside the protective suit had stopped working, and the second communicator only had an effective range of 100 meters. Therefore, they couldn't split up too much. Huimao swung his 4 fat legs and swayed around Silin like he was floating. "His perception has weakened," Huimao said. However, even if his perception had weakened, it was still better than Lung's equipment. Lung took out a cannon-shaped object and pointed it at the sky. Bang bang bang! After a few consecutive sounds, lights appeared from the seawater above them. They were all fluorescent spheres, but they were wrapped in a layer of outer shell, allowing them to float in the air. With the illumination of these fluorescent spheres, they could clearly see their surroundings. Although the light seemed insignificant in this kind of sea, their eyesight was enough to capture the scene nearby. In front of them, a huge mouth filled with sharp teeth appeared. Even if Silin and the others stacked together, they might not be as big as one of the teeth in this huge mouth. Its appearance gave them a fright. The hair on Huimao's back stood on end, and he almost transformed right away. However, they soon realized that this huge mouth was still, and it was trapped inside by something. Shifting their gazes to the side, they could see the owner of this huge mouth. Without a doubt, this was a giant beast that lived at the bottom of the sea. Its gigantic head, its gigantic body that was submerged in the darkness, and the reflection of some crystals made everything look incredibly strange. The so-called skyscrapers, that Silin and the others thought of as undersea city, were actually mountains of transparent crystals. No, to be more precise, they were all specimens. Sea beast specimens. These mountain-like crystals were nothing more than sealing these sea beasts inside, sealing away the once living side of these giant deep-sea beasts. Other than the giant beast specimen in front of them, there were also other giant beast specimens of different species around it. Some of the giant beasts sealed inside the crystals were lying on their sides, some were standing, and some were crawling just like the giant beast in front of them. Standing here, Silin and the others felt like they were as small as a speck of dust. Moreover, the faint shadows of Silin and the others were reflected inside the crystals. When they overlapped with the giant beasts inside the crystals, it added a frightening chill to everything. How on earth were these giant crystal mountain sea beast specimens made? The Shi family? Cheto, who wasn't wearing a protective suit, reached out and touched the crystals. After sensing them for a moment, he said, "These crystals have existed for 1,000 years. 1,000 years? Lung and the others were speechless. Who on earth had the ability to seal these giant sea beasts inside crystals in such a harsh environment 1,000 years ago? Scylla observed the giant beasts from 1,000 years ago sealed inside the crystal. The creatures inside the crystal were vivid and lifelike, and they were slightly different from the few recorded sea beasts. It could be seen that they were the same species 1,000 years ago, but after 1,000 years, the original species had mutated, and their appearance had changed a little, causing the contrast between the two. This was also due to the special environment of sea heaven. The mutation rate of the sea beasts living in sea heaven was very high, and 1,000 years was enough to cause a lot of changes in many species. "What do we do next, young master?" Pescado asked. Lung thought for a moment and took out the star map. The light of the key appeared and pointed to a certain direction. When Lung took out the star map, Ingweji, who was in a highly nervous state because of the giant beast specimens in front of him, started breathing heavily. The tear of God. It really is the tear of God. No wonder the young master's behavior was so abnormal, and no wonder he didn't act according to the plan. He had the tear of God's star map. Ingweji looked at Scylla. He was sure that Scylla was the one who gave the other star map fragment to Lung. He didn't think that a lousy captain of a hunter squad would have a star map, and more importantly, he was willing to take out the star map fragment. Ingweji wasn't the only one who recognized the star map. The others were familiar with Alilo's star map as well. After all, they were all people who followed Lung or Focus around, so it was only natural that they knew some secret. Their hearts that were originally unsettled because of the giant beast specimens quickly calmed down. For the sake of the tear of God, even if they all died here, they would still help the young master find the tear of God. "Let's go." Lung pointed at the direction indicated by the star map and started walking. Scylla took 2 steps and saw that Huimao wasn't following him. He turned his head and saw that the guy was lying on top of the seal of the giant beast specimen and was about to take a bite. The corner of Scylla's mouth twitched. He raised his hand and grabbed the hair on the back of Huimao's neck and pulled him over. "You won't even let go of a sea beast that has been dead for thousands of years?" Scylla let go of his hand and patted Huimao's head, indicating that Huimao should follow him obediently. The group walked for almost an hour in the mountain of specimens, but they didn't find any other giant beast. There weren't any living giant beasts in the surrounding area either. However, the detectors that were sent over earlier did find 2 of them. Could it be that those big guys aren't nearby? Pescado looked around and said. As soon as Pescado said this, the person next to him patted his head hard. "Do you want to meet one?" Pescado shook his head. "Not even if you beat me to death." The group followed the direction indicated by the star map and continued to walk forward. They arrived in front of a small protruding hill. This hill wasn't a mountain of crystals. It looked more like it was formed by a protrusion of the seabed's crust. The star map was pointing to this small mountain. The few of them walked around the small mountain and found a closed door in one place. Lung approached with the star map. As he got closer, the light of the key on the star map became brighter. The door opened. The key on the star map was the key to open this door. There should be a large empty space behind the door. After it was opened, seawater gushed in. Scylla and Ingweji grabbed Lung, who was almost sucked in. When the seawater finally calmed down, the group walked in. Under the illumination of the fluorescent stone, the empty space behind the door was also revealed. There was nothing unusual. There was nothing else in the 300 square meters space. After the group entered the door automatically closed again. The strange thing was that after the door closed, the seawater in this space was gradually drawn away. A circular opening opened in the middle of the space. A staircase extended from the ground to the top, connecting with an opening in the ceiling above Scylla's head. Ingweji took the lead and stepped on the staircase. The group followed behind him. After Ingweji entered the second level, The lighting inside was turned on, showing the scene inside the second level. On the walls of this space, Celine saw some murals. It was the handwriting of the Xi family from 1,000 years ago. Chapter 365. There were many things drawn on the wall, including sea beasts and abstract people. The one thing that convinced Celine that it was the work of the Xi family was the chessboard on the wall. Those who hadn't seen the Chain Stars chessboard would only be confused when they saw the dots of different sizes on the wall, but Celine had seen Xi Mu's Chain Stars chessboard before. Judging from the chessboard on the wall, this was at least the 7th layer of the chessboard. There was a circular platform on the second floor with a groove in the center. Judging from its size and shape, it was the same as the Olillo's star map fragment. Under the guidance of the others, Lung closed the star map in his hand and placed the Olillo's star map fragment inside. Crack, crack, crack. The circular platform began to rotate, one ring after another, in different directions. Some were clockwise, some were counterclockwise, and the angle of rotation was also different. In the end, when the 9 rings in the circular platform stopped rotating, a painting appeared on the circular platform. It was a sea beast. It looked like an amphibious reptile. However, both Lung and Ingweji said that this sea beast lived in the depths of the ocean. Celine didn't know how they came to this conclusion, but he trusted Lung and Ingweji's opinion. Andryara's data didn't contain any information about this sea beast. They didn't see it on their way down either. What is it trying to express? Lung asked as he looked at the circular platform. Celine glanced at Huimao. The guy's ears were twitching again, but before he could ask anything, a violent tremor interrupted him. What's going on? Is it an earthquake? While they were still in shock, a screen appeared on the circular wall on the second floor. The screen showed the scene outside. At this moment, outside the small mountain, buildings began to rise. They were not sea beast crystal specimens, but real buildings. The surface of the seabed's crust glowed with light, like a road paved in the middle of the rising city. There's really an underwater city. Everyone was shocked by what they saw on the screen. To be able to build a city at the bottom of sea paradise, what kind of ability did one have? As the hemispherical buildings rose, a layer of membrane-like cover spread out from the center of the city, expelling the seawater and making the buried city appear more real. The light barrier spread far and wide, forming a hemispherical shape that covered the area. When everything calmed down once more, the breathing of the people on the second floor of the small mountain began to quicken, especially Lung and the others. It was precisely because they understood the ocean and understood life in the ocean that they knew how difficult it was to achieve such a feat. Perhaps it would be simple in other places, but this was sea heaven. There were countless sea beasts, special magnetic fields, terrible environments, and disruptive substances. Of course, this also made them believe that the tear of God was definitely here. Let's go. Lung took the lead and walked downstairs. Ingweji and the others followed. Celine looked at Huimao, whose ears were perked up from time to time, and asked, "What did you find?" "I don't know. I keep feeling like there's something around here, but my perception has decreased here." "I'm not sure what it is," Huimao answered. "Machine. No, it's some kind of living creature. It's alive." While saying this, Whis clenched its paws and opened and closed its paws. "There's a very large mechanical structure underground," Cheto said while looking around, "and the energy supply here should be geothermal energy." Celine didn't doubt Cheto's analysis. At the same time, he admired the Xi family's abilities even more. They really were the peak generation that even the gods were jealous of. "Let's go and take a look." By the time Celine, Cheto and Huimao walked out of the small mountain, Lung and the others had already taken off their breathing mask. "The air composition here is almost the same as the air at sea. Even the pressure is the same," Lung said to Celine. Now that they were illuminated from the ground, they didn't need the fluorescent stones anymore. The place was much brighter than before, and they could see everything clearly. It should be possible. There must be a way to control the air composition and pressure here, Silen said while looking at the buildings rising from the ground. These buildings were of different sizes, but they were all hemispherical in shape. Moreover, they looked like ordinary stones that weren't transparent. They couldn't see inside or find an entrance. Lung wanted to find the tear of God, but he didn't know where to start. The buildings looked the same, and he couldn't cut them with a knife. At best, he could leave a few shallow scratches. Silen took off his breathing mask and protective suit. Then, he touched a hemispherical building with his finger. This building contains DH50 black ore, Silen said while feeling the information transmitted to his fingertip. He couldn't help but marvel at the similar buildings around him. To think that they could use so much of such rare DH50 black ore. It was obvious that Sea Heaven had a lot of DH50. The machines inside are moving, Cheto said. He could sense the machines inside the hemispherical buildings clearly. Silen had obviously sensed it when he touched the buildings just now. These buildings are just like houses and skyscrapers. There must be an entrance somewhere. I can't help but feel that since the Creator built a city here, it wouldn't just look like this. Young master, come over here. Not far away, Ingweji called out to Lung in a low voice. There was urgency and anxiety in his voice. Silen didn't move from his spot. Huimao's claws on his shoulder were retracting subconsciously again. Every time Huimao acted like this, it meant that he had sensed the presence of prey. Lung walked over and saw something. Suddenly, he turned around and looked around before fixing his gaze on Silen. Silen, watch out. The moment Lung said the first word, Silen felt something pouncing at him from behind. It was so fast that it was almost impossible to detect its presence. In fact, it was as if it were a shadow. Before Silen could move, Huimao was about to extend his claws, and Cheto was ready to fight. However, the thing suddenly stopped 5 meters away from Silen. It made a few rustling noises, but it didn't charge at him. Silen saw the thing's appearance clearly now. It was about 15 meters long, had 4 limbs, and a long tail. Its body was almost black, and it didn't have any scales. However, it gave off a tough and impenetrable feeling. Its eyes were the same color as the sea, and it had no pupils. However, its emotions could be seen from the depths of its eyes. There were folds of skin around their necks, and when they pounced at Cheto, their skin folds would shrink tightly against their neck. However, the black fellow in front of them had spread open like an umbrella. It was a very strange species. Marauders! Lung and the others took out their weapons. Energy guns weren't very useful in this place, so they could only use bullet. They also took out their blades. The Andryra family would send an expedition team to see paradise every couple of years or decade. Of course, they wouldn't go deep into the sea like Lung did this time. Sometimes, they would only observe from near the surface or in the air. However, the expedition team had only captured an image of this creature once in the past few years. They hadn't seen it again after that. They were incredibly fast, and the only time they captured an image was when 3 of them forced a middle sea beast out of the sea and killed it. The claws of the predator were far sharper than they looked, and with their advantage in speed, they could easily kill a creature that was nearly 100 times larger than them, and the prey couldn't even touch the predator. Only the core members of the Andryra family had seen images of the marauders back then. Lung and Ingweji were the only ones who had seen the images. The rest of them hadn't. Ingweji had seen a faint claw mark on the wall of a building just now. It was very similar to the claw marks of the marauders in his memory. That was why he was so anxious. The group of people who had captured the marauders tried to tame them, but they didn't even bat an eyelid and continued to hunt the large sea beast. After Lung saw the claw mark, he began to pay attention to his surroundings. They had the advantage of being human, so they were much more sensitive to aquatic creatures than other races. When he sensed that there was a marauder behind Silen, Lung hurriedly called out to warn them. However, neither Lung nor Ingweji had expected such a scene to occur. Why did the marauders stop? Lung asked Ingweji in a low voice. They didn't dare move recklessly, and they didn't dare to move too much either. That would make the marauders feel threatened and go berserk. That would be even harder to deal with. Ingweji didn't understand either. According to the Andrira family's records of the marauders, they were all very cruel. Once they started killing, they wouldn't stop until their prey was dead. According to the Andrira family's analysis, the marauders probably didn't have any natural enemies in this world. Regardless of whether their speculation was correct or not, they were all very curious as to why the marauder had suddenly stopped when it was clearly charging at them. Silen patted Huimao, who was itching for action, and told him to hold back for now. After observing the black fellow not far away from him for a moment, Silen suddenly thought of something and took out the gray cat's incredibly precious leather ball. Meow, Silen, why did you take out my ball? Huimao hurriedly reached out to protect the ball. It was impossible to find a ball like this in the entire League of Stars, and it was extremely rare even in the mist Bodhisattva sect. After all, no one would go and ask that giant viper to make another one, right? Let go, I'm just doing an experiment. If you don't let go, what if that black fellow scratches it? Silen noticed that the marauder in front of him had become even more vigilant as he watched Huimao protect the ball with its claws. Silen pulled at the ball in his hand and saw that it wouldn't budge, so he said to Huimao, "Why don't you play around here? That black fellow seems to be afraid of that 1,000-year-old viper's skin." Huimao flicked its ears and looked at the marauder that was baring its teeth and opening and closing the folds of its skin on its neck. It looked at them warily and hooked the ball with its claws. After it hit the building, Huimao jumped up and firmly hooked the ball with its tail. During this process, the marauder in Lung's mouth moved its gaze along with the ball. It even took a few steps back and growled warily when the ball was thrown. Lung and the others finally realized what was going on. Ingweji shot Lung a look. "What's that thing in that kid's hand?" "Lung, I don't know either." While everyone was paying attention to the marauder, Cheto moved around to the back of a building in a flash. While Cheto was moving, another black shadow flashed around the building. It was another marauder. "Oh, wait. We mean no harm. Don't kill me or it." A strange voice came from behind the building. It definitely wasn't Cheto's voice. "There's someone else?" Lung motioned for the others to go over and take a look. The marauder in front of Silen gave up on Silen the moment it heard the voice. It flashed and charged over. When Silen walked over, Lung, Ingweji, and the others were looking at Cheto strangely. Cheto was holding a person in his hand. He didn't look like a normal human, but he did look a lot like one. There was a marauder on each side of him. They were staring at Cheto like a tiger watching its prey. As for Cheto, a marauder was biting him from head to toe all the way to his abdomen. Cheto's outstretched arm was blocking the bite, so the marauder couldn't swallow him any further. The person Cheto was holding slapped the head of the marauder holding Cheto and urged, let go now." The marauder let out a few rustles of dissatisfaction before letting go and retreating to the person's side. Cheto's upper body was finally exposed, and there were teeth holes all the way from his abdomen to his head. Just how many rows of teeth did a marauder have in its mouth? It was as if a two-sided needle board had clamped down on Cheto's head. Ingweji and the others quickly discovered that there was no blood on Cheto at all. The holes on Lung's body quickly closed and returned to their original state under the group's wide-eyed gazes. It was as if the person who was almost swallowed just now wasn't him. "Who are you?" Silen asked. The person scratched his finger-thick hair with a webbed hand and said a little bashfully, "My name is Korea. Everyone calls me Sai." His one sentence revealed a lot of information. This person knew the common language of the League of Stars, and his tone carried a Sector H dialect. Secondly, he said everyone, meaning that there were other people here besides him. Thirdly, this person and his accomplices were very likely residents of this underwater city, and they were very familiar with the marauders. Seeing that Silen and the others didn't react, Korea said a little vexedly, I really didn't do it on purpose. I was just curious. Sillin motioned for Cheto to put Korea down before saying, "We mean no harm. You can have your companions put down their weapons now." Lung also motioned for his subordinates to put down their weapons. Korea looked at Sillin and then at the others. Then, he scratched his webbed right hand with his left hand, thought for a moment, and waved at the buildings. Not long after, the buildings were no longer the monotonous hemispherical shape they were before. Some parts of the buildings had become transparent like windows, and there were a few people who looked similar to Korea lying on the ground next to the windows. They were all armed. The person lying on the window of one of the buildings shouted at them, "Sai, ask them if they are intruders without keys. If they are, ask the guards to kill them." Sillin and the others. Didn't he find it strange that Bright Truth would shout something like this? Korea turned to look at Sillin and the others. About that, are you intruders without keys? Lung covered his face. Are the creatures here really so intelligent? After adjusting his emotions, Lung answered, "I brought the key here. It's right there." Lung pointed at the direction of the hill. "I couldn't have turned this place into this without the key. You guys were living underground before this, right?" Korea nodded hurriedly and said excitedly, Yes, we were living underground before this. I heard that this is the first time this city has risen up since it retracted into the ground." "Hey, they really did bring the key here." Korea waved at the buildings and shouted. After receiving confirmation, a door opened on the hemispherical buildings, and the people inside walked out. Most of them looked young. There was expectation in their eyes, as if they were looking forward to something. After these people walked out, a couple of predators ran over to them. These people seemed to be very familiar with the predators. Looking at the ferocious fellows wagging their tails like pet dogs, Lung felt a sense of absurdity. He always thought that no one could tame a high-level sea beast that tamers couldn't. But what was up with these people? Lung shook his head and looked at Cheto. He pinched him curiously and elbowed him. How did it feel to be half-eaten by a predator just now? Cheto thought for a moment before answering, "Bad breath." Lung. That was a pretty good experience. While Sillin and the others were thinking about what to do next, the people who were approaching them parted to make a path for them. An old man of the same race as Korea ran over with a bottle in his hand. The bottle made Lung's heart beat faster unconsciously. Could it be? The old man ran over and looked at Sillin and the others. Then, his gaze stopped on Lung and the others. "Are you looking for the tear of gods?" Yes." Lung was a little confused by the direct question. "Who wants the tear of gods?" "Me." Lung pointed at himself. "Here." The old man passed the bottle to Lung and looked at him expectantly. "Drink it. This is the tear of gods." Ingweji and the others looked at the old man suspiciously, but at the same time, they also felt that the thing in the bottle seemed to be communicating with them. There was a sense of intimacy, just like how they communicated with sea beasts after they tamed them. Lung stopped Ingweji from inspecting the bottle and accepted it. He said to the old man, "I heard that the tear of gods grants its user the ability to reform sea beasts." Yes, that is true. But I also heard that those who use the tear of gods only have a certain chance of success." Yes, that is true. What if they fail? The old man smiled kindly. "They will die." Lung,